It's 5:00, and I believe 1, 2. Looks like we have a quorum. And I see 8. So I will call the November 20th, 2024 meeting of the Transportation Commission to order. And Ariana, could you please read the instructions?
Welcome to our virtual meeting. We're going to cover a few basic items before beginning. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. To members and city staff. Members, if you are able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. Use raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak or ask questions. Staff, click raise hand when you are asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak. The name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the commission, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ariana. Aiden, could you call the roll, please?
Sure. Bennett.
Here.
MGR Govindarajan.
Okay.
Dina Nina Martinez Rutherford is excused. Barbara Harrington McKinney.
Present.
Ann Kovich.
Here.
Robbie Weber.
Here.
Denise Jess.
Here.
Pepe Barros is excused. Chris McCahill.
Here.
Bill Bremer.
Here.
And Harold Kleems is at the BPW meeting.
Nope, he's here.
He is here.
Oh, never mind. Sorry.
I abandoned them.
Okay, thanks. Thanks so much, everybody. It looked like we were going to be tight on quorum, so thanks everybody for being here tonight. If we do have anybody, let's see. It looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 8 right now, so we can lose 2 and still have quorum. And I know Alder Harrington McKinney has to leave at 6:30, so we'll just have to be really careful to watch for quorum. Did everybody have an opportunity to look at the minutes from the last meeting? Bill?
I'll make a motion for approval of the minutes from the last meeting.
Okay, there's a motion by Bill. Is there a second? Chris?
Yes, second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Okay, seeing no hands, I'm going to assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody wishes to vote no or abstain. Okay, seeing no hands, motion is carried. Do we have anybody registered under item 1 for public comments on items not on the agenda?
We do not.
Okay. So we will move on to item 2, and I understand that we do have at least one person registered to speak on item 2. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yep. We have 2.
Okay. 2 people. Okay.
Yep.
So what we'll do is hear from staff and then hear from the general public, and then we'll go to discussions and questions. So Tom Moore, are you going to take this one?
Yes, I am. Let's see. I'll share my screen. Yeah, hi. So Tom Moore with Traffic Engineering. I'll just go through a background of this and then we can hear from residents and discuss. So this is concerning the Hill Valley development. It's the area here, kind of this open field area confined by Pleasant View Road to the west, High Point Road to the east, just north of Midtown Commons. I'll pull this away and I'll show what the plat actually looks like. So we include these documents. The actual plat, we're less concerned with that. We're here tonight to talk about High Point Road and what we should do there. We're looking for feedback. So I'll just click through these. This is a multi-year plat. It's going to take several years for this to all be built up. There's connecting streets across the plat from Pleasant View to High Point Road. Different types of housing, different land uses, but what we're really concerned with is what we do on High Point Road. So I included a color version of this. So just to explain these cross sections a little bit, right now High Point Road is the first cross section shown. So the 80-foot right of way. The street width is 54 feet. And these to the right, so the middle and the one to the right, are options that we are considering. We like the idea of the 10-foot path on the west side. That's the side of the development. We're not proposing to fully reconstruct High Point Road with this project. So we're kind of using the existing curb. That's the reason for that. Existing, it's a 4-lane road. It's probably overbuilt. The existing volume, we consultant collected counts this past summer in June. There was 11,600 vehicles. Speeds are very high. 85th percentile speed is 42 miles per hour. Of those 11,000, just over 11,000 vehicles, close to 1,000 were going over 45 miles per hour. So what we are looking at and considering is, do we want to include parking with the development? Because this decision will determine how the development is laid out with driveways and access. So this is kind of the first step, is to get this High Point Road figured out, and then the development can go for the approvals. I think it was scheduled for an earlier plan commission date, but that was pushed off to get this decision tonight about how to proceed with High Point Road. The last page is what we would plan to do in the future after a resurfacing of High Point Road, to remark this as a two-way or 2-lane roadway with a center turn lane. So I'm going to go back to the Google Earth just to show that and our reasoning for that. So like I said, it's kind of 4 lanes. I can explain this better. So if you're up at Watts Road, the cross section is 4 lanes with bike lanes, and that continues south basically to where this new neighborhood will be. Curb and gutter on both sides, and then the curb on the west side ends. So our thinking is we would fit in the new path, the new roadway, or the new marked lanes with this development, and then come back in the future to remark the lanes, just because we don't want to try to grind all this off, all the pavement markings, and remark it right away. We would wait to do that with the resurfacing. So the other part about High Point Road that I wanted to point out is the grade. So that's what this is showing down here, is the elevation profile. You can see where this is. So where the arrow is up there by the water towers, the top of the hill, and then it's a pretty substantial downhill to the south, around a 7% grade. Um, and then there's another hill that comes back up further to the south as you get closer to Midtown Road. But again, we're concerned about this area directly adjacent to the new plat and whether or not we should provide parking in that area. So again, what we're showing here on the two different pages are the same geometrics. It's just that the last page is showing what we would do in the future. The first page is showing what we can do now. So the difference is the parking cutout on the rightmost cross section. It is a wider right of way with bike lanes on the street. So that's another consideration, a path plus the bike lanes on the street. But again, something to consider is that steep grade of High Point Road definitely wouldn't really be considered in all ages and abilities for, you know, kids trying to get up that grade. That's why we like the off-street path. And I think that pretty much covers it from our end. So it's kind of the two different considerations: the leave the parking off to kind of match what the rest of the street is, or provide the parking for the new housing that will go on the plat. And this decision will determine how the plat is laid out with the housing. So I know that we've got speakers from the development side that can explain that better. So I'll just leave it off right here for me. Thanks.
Okay, Robbie, I was hoping to wait until after we hear from the public to have questions from the commission. If that's okay, we'll come back to you. I'll come back to you first. Chris Petakowski, did you have something to add from the staff presentation point before we hear from the public?
Yeah, just a little quick context before you hear from the developers team. So the reason we're bringing the request to you is the developer has requested that the plat be laid out a certain way, which has front-facing units along High Point Road. And they feel very strongly that to make the front-facing units more marketable or marketable at all, they need to have a lane of parking in front of it. So I just wanted to provide a little context why we're providing the two options.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
And then it does have a fair bit of consequences, our decision, because if you flip the units, that changes the street widths kind of a few streets back. So it is a fairly decent sized decision to make. And that affects how when it goes to Plan Commission next 2 weeks, how it would be laid out. Yep.
Okay, and I'm sure people have a lot of questions, but why don't we hear from the public first? Somebody has their hand up. We just normally go in the order of which people are registered to speak, so I'm not sure why you have your hand up. So Aiden, can we just go to whoever is registered first?
Yes, so our first registrant is Jesse Detmer of Welton Drive, neither supports nor opposes, and is representing High Point Estates Homeowners Association.
Okay. Go ahead, Jesse.
Can you hear me?
I think you, yes,
Yep,
now we
okay.
can.
Sorry, different interaction of Zoom. So I am the president of the High Point Homeowners Association, High Point Estates. That's directly across the street is down Welton Drive and New Washburn. And when we learned about the Hill Valley neighborhood, it was traffic and engineering was our primary concern from the residents. We did survey the residents, and that was the number one question. So I'm a little bit concerned about, we're primarily concerned about the volume of traffic and the impact that, this is not a small development plan that's being proposed to impact the traffic on High Point. Many residents, including myself, feel that it is currently dangerous to turn into our neighborhood southbound on South High Point, or to turn out of our neighborhood southbound on South High Point. Those two left-hand turns are not protected in any way, and we think it's fortunate that we haven't had more accidents. It was nice a few years ago when the southbound lane was expanded to be 2 lanes, or a total of 4 lanes, a little farther, so that there was a dedicated lane to get past those turning onto Welton. But that does narrow, and I understand that the long-term plan would be to make that 4 lanes, but that doesn't really improve that. So one of my questions would be, what is the timeline for the resurfacing, which the plan would be to make this 3 lanes or 2 lanes with a dedicated center turn lane. I think that may improve things, but I'm a little worried. I'm even a little worried that wouldn't do it all. But if that's like 10 years away, that's probably a little too far. If it's 2 years, then the development hasn't changed that much. So that would be the first question. The other thing would be from the contractor who gathered the volume data. This is primarily a residential neighborhood, and so I think you'll see the much higher volumes, around 7, 8 o'clock in the morning and 4, 5, 6 p.m. in the evening, and that's when it is most difficult to make that turn lane. That is so much of a challenge. It's not so much of a problem at 8 p.m. or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And then the other thing that I will note, based on the presentation that was given so far tonight, is having lived in this area for 10 years, 10, 12 years now, to my knowledge, there are no other, I'm going to say, neighborhoods that face South High Point. Everything else is a backyard. There are a few independent homes in that area and a daycare towards the south end, but the established neighborhoods, High Point Estates, and the neighborhoods to the south, don't have fronts of homes facing South High Point. So I think adding front-facing homes would be a departure from the current area, for whatever that's worth.
Okay, thanks. Does anybody on the commission have a question for the speaker?
I do have, this is Alder Harrington McKinney.
Go ahead, Alder.
Yes, Jesse, have you polled the neighbors related to their concerns? How many households that are in the High Point Estates area?
We have approximately 240 homes. Now, a fair number of those are away from South High Point. They're kind of on the other half. We had approximately 50 respondents to our survey, which is pretty good for any of our normal polling. And I'm going to say 90% of them mentioned traffic on South High Point.
Okay. Are you continuing or tracking how this build out is going to be? Is there a dedicated group that's going to be looking at and tracking the build out? And I know that you had specific questions about the timeline. Is that how are you tracking and who have you been in contact with?
As far as within the neighborhood, I've been representing the neighborhood as the president, providing updates to the community, and the intention is to provide an additional update tomorrow at our annual meeting, which will probably see about 70, hopefully about 70 people attend, and the rest will look for the minutes afterwards. I think we were looking for additional information from this meeting and from the city to determine, to engage the community further as far as further public comment. But we were hoping that our polling would be impactful and representing the neighborhood without needing to ask, a lot more people to engage directly as the homeowners association.
Okay. Is there anything else that you would like to add bring note to the commission about your concerns about the traffic volume and churning?
I that was the highlighted concern, was primarily as it relates to South High Point, is the ability to make safe turns, and whether additional traffic control was needed, whether that be a stoplight or roundabout or something. Understanding that there's not room today, but there'll be even less room, in our opinion, in the future once buildings are built along the west side of South High Point, to make any further changes. And so it feels like adding over 1,000 homes to this area is a significant impact on the existing infrastructure. So now would be the time to make a plan and act, as opposed to waiting for the future when it becomes already painful.
Okay.
And we're having a separate conversation about the impacts of traffic on folks trying to cut through High Point Estates, but we don't think it's necessary to address that here.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm complete.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alder. Anybody else have a question? Any other commission members have a question, or alders? Okay, thanks, Jesse. Who else do we have, Aiden?
Dan Day of Westward Way supports.
Can't hear you, Aiden.
So next we have Dan Day of Westward Way supports and is representing Viridian Homes.
Okay, Dan, go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Dan Day from D'Onofrio, Cockey & Associates. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much for taking the time here this evening. So I also have with me Matt Brink from Viridian Homes, their Director of Land Development. Hill Valley obviously is a major neighborhood here on the west side of Madison, and we're really zeroing in on and focusing in on the potential for on-street parking for High Point Road in the southern portion of our neighborhood only. The current preliminary plat proposes one section of the roadway where it's actually more in the flatter area from the existing Velvet Leaf on the east side to the south, one block where we would have on-street parking. The proposal came about effectively from a request from Planning Division to see if we could have an element of front-facing homes to High Point to kind of engage High Point versus not engaging High Point and having the backs of homes to High Point, because we have done plans that show similar with backs facing to High Point Road. So we took a look at it and came upon this proposal, We feel that this is, something that actually is beneficial. We have this in several different areas across the communities with Viridian, across this community of having front-facing homes out to some of these streets. One on Valley View Road, out on the east side on Lean Road, we have the same thing, similar circumstance. But we think it's vitally important to provide parking in front of this. If not, I believe it's a safety issue, because people are going to stop to drop off pizzas, to need to park for the homes, so that they have some sort of utility for that front. We do have a couple of circumstances where there isn't parking in front of these on major on roadways, and feel that it's actually a safety hazard. So we're firmly and believe that if we're going to have front-facing homes to this, that we need some sort of parking element to it. The two options that Tom had out there, obviously we would prefer that option 2, which provides that parking element to it. We actually have a little more width planned in there than what Tom has, but we can downsize it to the 94 versus the 100 that we have right now. So this is what we're looking for a decision, is that one block from Velvet Leaf to the south of the way the preliminary plat has it shown is a wider right of way than the 80-foot the rest of the way. That 80-foot would provide that full build out on the cross sections that Tom had shown there. Remember that this is a very large development. This is probably going to be 10 to 15 years in implementation for it. So there's significant time frame as to the full build out of this, and will take time to implement as time goes along. With that, Like I said, if we do, if the commission decides to not have parking along High Point there, we will look at a different grid system a little bit in the southeast corner to have more of a system similar to what High Point has and what we have at Valley Ridge also, where we have the rears of the homes facing High Point, probably do some sort of landscape fencing buffer along High Point through that area in that block. So just wanted to make sure we got everything out there out in front. And then I guess I'd like to, Commissioner, Chairwoman, if you wouldn't mind if Matt had something to add, if he would be able to do that, that would be great too.
Did Matt register to speak?
I think he registered to answer questions.
Okay. That would be fine if he has, anybody object to Matt adding anything if he has anything to add?
No, I would really like to hear from Matt. This is Alder McKinney.
Did you have anything to add, Matt?
Yes, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Again, thank you very much, everyone, for your time tonight. Dan touched on some of the kind of key points that we at Viridian we're focusing on, be it safety. Just to reiterate that, if we were to put front-facing homes here without parking directly on the street, we believe strongly the Amazon trucks, the pizza delivery guys, as Dan mentioned, would just stop because they would really have no other option than to do that. But when, as Dan mentioned, when we got this recommendation from planning to see if front-facing homes was possible on High Point, we were very encouraged by that. We personally believe it's a better streetscape. We think it'll be a better look for High Point to have front-facing homes. And we were also able to add 17 additional homes to the plat as a result of that and reworking the grid. So we were very encouraged by that, being able to add a little bit of additional density, provide some more attainable housing to Madison residents, which I think is all of our shared goal collectively. So that was another positive that we saw. But again, as Dan mentioned, if the commission decides to go the other way and not provide parking on High Point, we just wouldn't be able to have front-facing homes there. Aside from the safety issue, it's just a marketability issue on Viridian's side. We couldn't sell homes that didn't have parking in the front. That just isn't something that we feel would work and be a viable product. So we think we have a very good option. We really appreciate staff's time in working through all the different kind of design criteria that we went through, and we just think it'll be a net positive to have these homes fronting High Point with the parking on High Point as well. So again, thank you for your time and happy to answer any additional questions.
Yes, Alder Bennett, did you have a question for the speaker?
Yeah, for Dan or Matt, I was just wondering, does either way impact the amount of homes that you're going to put on the parcels, or is that not a factor?
Yeah, I'll take a first crack, and Dan, you can add in if needed. When we looked at shifting homes to front facing, the way we were able to kind of reorientate the grid, it was able or allowed us to add 17 homes total by doing this. So it was a very nice uptick in density overall. So yes, it would directly impact the amount of homes that we can offer if we can have the homes front facing, or if we had to switch them to have backyards facing High Point.
Right, and that's only possible with the parking option.
That is correct, yeah. We just couldn't market homes that wouldn't have the parking in front. Yeah, it'd just be very difficult to make that work. So we would have to shift away from that if we couldn't have parking along High Point.
Right, so with the parking on High Point, you get 17 additional houses.
That's correct.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alder. Robbie, go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't quite catch what part of the development would have the front-facing homes. I'm looking at the documents that have the plat on it, and I'm trying to figure out if it's the multi-family homes that would face High Point, or if it's the southeast corner. That I don't know what density that is, but on the plat, it's like sort of a rust color.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's that. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Tim.
Yeah, it's that southern piece. It's the single family right where the arrow is, those lots right through there, you can kind of see it's a little bit wider in that zone on High Point. So that's from that street, between those two streets is where we're asking for the extra width to allow for the on-street parking.
Okay, so sorry, I was looking at the documents on the computer. So you said show me again?
Yeah, it's right from that stretch right there that I think Tom's got shared his screen there. It's right in that stretch through there.
And those are single family homes, is that right?
Yes, they have the garages behind off the carriage lane behind.
Okay, so they won't have driveways going on to High Point.
That is correct. Yep.
People will load the garages are off the alley. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, I apologize. I should have made that clear from the start. All those garages face the alley in the back, so there will be no driveways out onto High Point Road.
Okay. And how many parking spaces are being built for those homes? Off-street parking spaces?
So there'll be a minimum of 2-car garage. And I believe at least portion of the sites will have a minimum of 2 stalls behind the garages.
Okay, so 4 off-street parking spaces, plus you want parking in the front.
There would be potential up to 4 off streets. There will be some home types that will use more of the full of the building pad that will not allow that, but I would say probably half would have that. And then the parking up front, yes, it wouldn't probably be the entire frontage because it'll want some buffers from the intersections. I would assume traffic engineering would want that, but at least the middle 3/4 of that would be parking along High Point.
Okay. I mean, I'm generally supportive of having front loading, parking in front of houses, but the problem occurs, and I'll discuss this with the traffic engineering and engineering folks, is that if it's not used, it's just a big wide street that makes people go faster.
Yeah,
so that's why I was trying to figure out where people were going to be loading their cars from.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Okay, Harold, you have questions.
Yeah, only one question. So I think you mentioned the Amazon truck and the pizza delivery. So I wanted to what do you envision these the parking lane would be used for? Is it primarily delivery access, or is it people living in the houses just parking there overnight?
No, I would say there's going to be some parking overnight from general homeowners through there. Obviously, anybody having a special event would have that. We just feel that that's important to it. Is that going to be parked up 100% of the time? I kind of doubt it. With just the residents there, but I would certainly say that there's going to definitely be some demand for parking from those individual units for that.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this is Matt from Veridian. Just to add on as well, as Dan mentioned, the driveways for the garages in the back could vary in depth depending upon the building pad size, and some of our residents or owners, if they are in the construction industry and have work trucks and things of that nature, sometimes it might not fit at all or easily in those driveways. That'd be another opportunity for parking as well. So it's just important that we just have all those options to our buyers, because we just don't know what type of buyer would ultimately want to buy the home and what their parking needs would be.
Thank you.
Thanks, Harold. Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. I just wanted to clarify that that is meant to be an alley behind those homes that would be fronting South High Point Road, and that you don't think that could be used for things like deliveries, because I am thinking of alleys in Chicago that do function that way.
No, I don't see that it's definitely an alley, and that's definitely where the garages will be facing. I don't have a circumstance where I know of all the stuff that I've done for Veridian and in Madison over the last 20, 25 years that where they have delivered off the alley, because the front doors are positioned so they are out the front of the home, which would be out to High Point in this circumstance.
Great, thanks.
Okay, are there other questions for the speakers? Okay, is that all the speakers then, Aiden?
That is all for that item, yes.
Okay, and Matt and Dan, if you want to hang with us, I suspect that it's possible during the course of the discussion that there may be questions that may need to come back to you. So if you could hang with us, that would be appreciated. So let's go to questions and discussions. And Robbie, you were first before, so go ahead.
Yeah, I actually had just a couple questions for staff. I guess I will ask the question that the first speaker asked. What is the timeline for the rebehaving or rebuilding High Point when it might be converted into 2 lanes with a shared left turn lane? What's the general timeline on that?
Good question. We don't have like a full resurface schedule. This road is kind of in a stage of its life where it's just going to kind of be chip sealed for a few rounds before hopefully we need to do an expensive resurfacing. But the marking can be redone with the chip seal, of course. And I think the last chip seal we did is 22, and we would generally do that every 5 to 7 years. So we're looking 27 through 29-ish is my guess.
Okay. So we also heard quite a bit. I mean, you said that it was overbuilt for the capacity, which, doesn't surprise me. But also concerns about speed. I mean, you did a speed study and people were speeding quite a bit. And the first speaker mentioned how hard it is to get in and out of the development on the other side, High Point Estates. So I'm wondering if there's any plans when that's remarked to make it, to either lower the speed limit or to make other modifications that would make it more likely that people would drive closer to the speed limit. I mean, 45 does seem pretty fast for people to pull over into parking in front of houses. And if people are exceeding that now, I'm trying to figure out how we can make this a little bit more neighborhood-like and less speedway. So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear any comments on those topics.
I'd just like to show it. So this is kind of like right at the development. I think this is right around where the speed study was taken, and you can see how the existing houses on the east side are kind of blocked off. It's just trees on the west side. So this is set up perfectly for speeding. Not surprising at all that there's really high speeds out here. I mean, it's more like a highway. So we do think that, once the west side is built up, especially if there's front facing and some parking, that's going to make it feel different than what it does now. Because right now you're pretty safe to really speed through here. And then especially with the hills, and there's just not much to slow anyone down right now. We think in the future, when this is fully built out, like what was brought up, that we would look at the signal warrants, possibly do something at these intersections, but you can see the phasing. This is getting into phase 4, phase 6. So this is going to be a few years away. We don't plan to do anything really right away. But kind of more address issues as they come up.
Okay. And the path that you had proposed, that would continue between the parking and the fronts of the houses? Is that what plan is?
Yep. So, yeah, the path would be on the west side here and then parking with a little bit of terrace in between.
Okay. Okay, I see. So what we're losing, we're basically cutting out of the terrace. That's where the space is coming from.
Or we're adding right of way to the city. So without the parking, we could keep the narrower right of way. But if we add parking, we do plan to expand the right of way.
Okay, but it looks like with 94-foot right of way, at least where there's no parking, you've got a 16-foot terrace. Would
Yeah.
that continue all the way up to the end of the development?
That's a good question. I think we would probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris or Tim, but
I think the right of way bows out for this block for this reason, and it would be a normal 8-foot terrace north of there.
it's kind of shown right here at the
Okay.
intersection where it comes out.
So then there is no place that there's a 16-foot terrace.
Right.
Just at the ends of
maybe
the blocks.
at the intersections, yeah.
At the intersections. Okay. 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 Do you think parking on a 45-mile-an-hour road is going to be used? I mean, it just seems like people will be hesitant to slow to park if people are going that fast. So I'm trying to figure out a way to make this a little bit more neighborhood-like in the future.
Mhm. I think with that housing density and with the front facing, it will be used, especially, obviously for loading and things like that. But right, it's kind of, I don't know if anyone has anything to add, but from what we see is that people like to park in the front rather than go around just for convenience in the higher density areas. But
And what's the density in this area where the parking is going to be provided?
20 single-family homes in a block. I don't
I'm sorry,
have 20 single-family homes in that block face. I don't have
Okay.
a dwelling unit per acre. But
I thought
it's
there was something in one of these things that had that. I don't know why. I thought there was a dwellings per acre on one of these documents, but can't find it now.
and Tom can clarify, but the posted speed limit is 35 on this section, but
Oh.
it's in reality it's traveled at much higher speeds because of the straightness of the cross section and the lack of activation that you have on the east side of the road, but it's not posted for 45.
Okay, I misunderstood. I'm sorry about that. I thought it was posted at 45.
oh, sorry, no, that is the 85th percentile speed was 42, and I just gave the number for it was close to 1,000 vehicles going over 45 on the day that the speed study was collected.
Okay.
But right, that's not the speed limit. It's just
Okay, so the
How people are
posted
driving.
speed limit is 35.
Mhm.
Okay.
I think so.
Okay, I think that was all my questions. Thank you for clarifying.
Thanks.
Oops.
Dan has his hand up. Robbie, are you interested in hearing his thoughts?
Sure, especially if you can tell me the density there.
Go ahead, Dan.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, just a quick clarification. I do not have the density right offhand, Robbie, but the posted speed limit on High Point was actually just reduced from 35 to 30 a few weeks ago. So I happen to travel the roadway quite often. So just to let you know, it was just recently changed.
Okay, all right, thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks. Alder Harrington McKinney, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. What we've been talking about is really as I turn into my own subdivision, and it might be posted or reduced from 35 to 30. But coming off of that grade, people do speed. They're speeding now, and if it were not prior to that bump out, there were several crashes there, and so there is concern. I'm thankful for this conversation, and Veridian. They've been good partners, so I'm sure that we'll be tracking that. But there is speeding, and it's not 30 coming off that hill. They fly down that road pretty quickly, and as I said, those not those homes that are not front facing. That's exactly where I turn into my subdivision, and sometimes it's difficult because they're speeding down that road. And so this is a good conversation for us to have, and for staff and also Veridian to make note of what these comments are, because if you are living in that area, you do realize that they're not maintaining that 30 mile an hour coming in that area. I'm complete.
Thanks, Alder. Harold, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I think two questions probably. The first one, so if the parking is built, and so that, if I understood it correctly, means the right-of-way needs to be extended. So related to that, and you mentioned potential signalization at one of the intersections in the future. So my understanding is if you have a larger right-of-way, it means you have a larger intersections, which has impact on the capacity of you need to make the phases longer, the pedestrian crossings get longer. So can you talk a little bit about the impact of having that expanded right-of-way on what the signalization would look like from an efficiency and safety perspective?
Sure. For this stretch, we would probably leave the intersections tighter and then expand out. So between the two intersections in the plat there, it would be I don't know if it would be exactly how the right of way would work. The lines would be here, but right at the intersection, we would probably match it up with to the north, and then we would go south and expand out for the parking cutout. So as far as like signal phasing and pedestrian walk times and things like that, I wouldn't consider that an issue for this for the parking.
Okay. And at the south end, there would be basically we're talking about a parking bay where at the intersections it's not set back.
Yep.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. The other question, what's your thinking with the bike facilities here? So we have a 10-foot path. For now, you're proposing to keep the 5-foot unprotected bike lanes. 5 foot probably includes the gutter, but anyway. And then in the future vision, that would expand to a buffered bike lane 7+3, I see here.
Yeah. I would just say, just think of it as this is the existing curb line, and we don't plan to change that unless we add in the parking lane. Then we would cut in and bump it up or bump it in. But this 54 feet is kind of matching is the existing. So this is just remarking that 54 foot.
Okay.
So yeah, if we were coming in here with no street and building a new street, we would likely not, we wouldn't build it this wide.
Yeah, I mean, my big concern in the short term is to have a 5-foot bike lane in the door zone next to whatever 30 to 45 mile an hour traffic. And then in the longer term, the concern is, as you said, I mean, there's a steep grade. You have the off-street path. So the bike lanes are probably not going to be heavily used, which basically means it continues to you have this impression of the wide open street. Mm-hmm. And that will continue to have the, people might pass on the right if if you have narrowed it to two lanes with center turn lane, people might pass in the bike lane. So I have concerns about this. Like, I mean, yes, it's nice to have both a path and buffered bike lanes, but in this particular context, I'm not so sure about it.
Mhm.
And I'm assuming you're not considering doing a wholly protected bike lane or shifting the parking and the bike lane to have a parking protected bike lane.
Right. We could look into not fully building this all the way out and pushing the parking as far as it is. It would just create some kind of awkward transitions where we, maybe we don't need the bike lane or the buffer, where we could tighten things up, but then we're still kind of dealing with this cross section further to the north up to Walnuts.
Yeah, I guess it would only be that one block.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I have for questions for now.
Thanks, Harold. Bill, go ahead.
Thank you, Ann. Tom, have you looked at the possibility or potential of incorporating roundabouts at any of these intersections? I was listening to the first speaker concern about getting out to High Point, and at some of the intersections that roundabouts would do a better job than traffic signals at some of these locations. And if we're looking at that, now would be the time to incorporate them or maybe save space for them.
I'm not sure if that was looked into, but I do know that would likely mean taking away from the properties on the east to make those fit in with the existing street layout.
But if the street was offset to the west,
right, it would have to be something like that. Yeah. But I don't think that was ever drawn up.
I guess I'd be interested to think what the developers think of that idea.
Dan, Matt, you care to comment on the roundabouts?
I'll let Matt comment too, but we hadn't really considered roundabouts because I think might be a little high volume for them for what Madison's been considering about for roundabouts in the recent past. From our perspective, I think, we could probably make it work from a land use perspective on our side. I just know that it'll have an impact on the other side, which I haven't even looked at. Matt, did you have anything to add?
I guess, my thought is that I think the roundabouts would do a better job of controlling the speeds rather than traffic signals. Just when people see the green light, they're going to continue their high speed as they approach, especially on the grade downhill.
Any other comments from staff or the developer?
Yeah, or Tom Lynch or Yang or.
Yeah, I don't know that Yang was able to join us. Oh, there's Yang. He's here. Okay. Yang or Tom, do you have anything to add with regard to roundabouts? Tom Lynch or Tom Moore or Yang? Two Toms?
I can defer to Yang if Yang wants to start, if he's not available.
Yeah.
Are you here, Yang?
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, I just got home. I missed a question. So Tom.
Question.
Yeah.
Bill has a question about using roundabouts here.
I guess at this stage of the development of, we're talking about something, obviously it's not something that would be due next year or the year after that, but when we're going to look at, 7, 10 years out.
I'll give you my opinion. It's not necessarily the opinion of of the DOT, even though I'm the head of the DOT. I think our roundabouts are a safer, oftentimes a safer alternative for motor vehicle traffic. I think they are perhaps less beneficial for pedestrians. You know, they and particularly those who are visually impaired have a more difficult time navigate them. So I have generally, you know, I'm going to just say 15 years ago, roundabouts were the solution to everything. And right now I probably lean a little more towards traditional traffic control just because it's perhaps slightly easier for pedestrians and those who are visually impaired.
Yeah, I guess
ahead.
at this stage, you know, it has not been looked at, is what you're saying, and I guess at this stage it's kind of. I mean, do we know anything about you know, bus service in the future, 10 years out from now? You know, with adding this quantity of homes and so forth, the neighborhood development out to the southwest. I mean, yeah, we're not ready to do that now, but you know, you're making decisions now that you're going to be doing 10 years from now. So, you know, I think you haven't necessarily addressed or looked at all of the different potential options. So,
Yeah. Well, we have Yang and Chris have their hands up. Yang, you want to go ahead, and then Chris?
Sure. Yes. Thank you. Yeah. Sorry that I was on my bike. Just got home. So, I generally agree with Tom. You know, roundabout has a lot of safety benefits for sure, but they're definitely harder to navigate for many users. But we did, recently install, a couple of those along Pleasant View Road. So I think there are situations that, they are a better choice. There are situations that they are, not as good a choice. So we can definitely, take a look at it here, to see whether, there is benefit to keep that option open down the road. So thank you.
Yeah, and something that you may have missed part of the discussion, Yang, since you just were able to join us now, and there's been a lot of concern expressed about the high speeds in the area, and I think some of the thought was that roundabouts may help slow some of that traffic down.
That is true.
Say again?
Oh, that is definitely true. Yeah, roundabouts definitely tend to slow people down.
Okay.
But there are definitely other traffic calming measures we can use in conjunction with traffic signals, for example, as well. So but I think we'll take a look to see whether it's beneficial to keep the option open. But roundabout definitely takes much more space, so that's another downside.
Okay, thanks, Yang. Chris Petakowski, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna add a little bit. So I was the project engineer for those two roundabouts on Pleasant View, and I was just measuring them on my screen here, and they're in the range of like 250 feet wide. So the space for around a 2-lane roundabout is very significant. And one of the things here is that northern intersection has a lot of grade to it, so that would be challenging as well. I just wanted to provide that context.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Yeah, you have your hand up. Did you have more to add? No? Okay.
Yes. Sorry, I was doing it on my phone, so it's hard to find all the buttons. So
yeah, right. I get it. That's okay. No problem. Chris McCahill, go ahead.
Thanks. I guess a question probably for Tom. I know you sometimes talk to folks in other cities or look for examples. So I'm kind of just curious if you did find anything that looks like option 2 that sort of assured you this could work. My thoughts is it's trying to do a lot. You've got a twiddle with the bike lane and the parking. It's sort of like a Frankenstein's road here, and we're trying to slow down traffic, and I'm concerned that the additional parking would offset that. So it just feels like a lot.
Is that for Tom Moore or Tom Lynch?
Oh, I was thinking Tom Moore.
Okay, Tom Moore, go ahead.
Yeah, so basically comparable streets to this. I don't have any off the top of my head, I guess is the answer.
We might, in a much more urban context, Gorham, maybe it's probably 5 years ago, which is a one-way street, but has a bike lane, and we were trying to preserve trees, but we found that providing a limited amount of parking seemed to satisfy the users. The adjacent users. I wish I perhaps I have not been involved in this. We do have problems with curb management and loading, and ignoring that has caused us problems in other parts of the city. So there's a little bit, but for instance, I feel like what engineering has done on Wilson Street is amazing, but the lack of just acknowledging kind of the Amazons of this world has caused us problems, and people are parking, right in facilities that were not meant for parking.
Other questions, Chris? No? One of the questions that I have, I live just off Moreland Road, and there's parking spaces provided on Moreland Road, but there's not often people parked in those spaces. And as a result, the road is much more wide open and people speed more because it is more wide open. And I think maybe it was Robbie sort of mentioned this earlier. Would the option 2 not provide, if there's nobody occupying those parking spaces, if they're really only used for short-term drop-off, wouldn't that make for a wider road and potentially encourage speeding?
Yeah, I can, one comparable for that would be, which we're going to bring soon, is Midvale Boulevard. But I think the difference here is the layout of the lots. So these, assuming parking is provided, the houses would face High Point with the little alleyway in the back. I think the parking would be more utilized here than a place like Midvale. Midvale, where it's single family homes with a driveway that can fit a vehicle, very low utilization. But then when you get towards the area with the multifamily apartments, the parking is used on street. So I think that would be kind of the case here, where higher density people prefer to park on the street for convenience rather than go around the back. And then the front right would be used by loading. So, and just to be clear, if we don't provide the parking, then that would change the layout of the lots. So I think Dan or Matt could explain it, but they would not go with the layout that is shown here with the alley in the back and the front of the houses facing High Point. It would be flip-flopped to look more like what it looks like on the east side of High Point.
Okay, does staff have a recommendation for an option?
Traffic engineering is pretty neutral on this. We don't have a strong I think either way will probably work. Yeah, just no strong
Okay.
feeling.
Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the option that's being presented creates a better public realm, more activity along High Point Road than what you would see if you mirrored what happened in Valley Ridge directly opposite on the east side. And so while the Plan Commission, the Planning Division would defer to traffic engineering in this commission on whether or not there should be parking, what the ultimate cross section should be. We do support the development pattern that is being proposed by the subdivider because it activates High Point Road, and that would be consistent with plan guidance, which call for creating a more active streetscape and more activated public realm. And certainly we feel that you'll get that from homes oriented to High Point Road, much more so than you will a subdivision that backs onto High Point Road, which we have examples of directly across the street. So I guess by relation to the fact that Viridian's saying that it's not viable without the parking, I guess that means I'm saying planning would support the parking in this case, but we certainly support the development pattern that the developer has indicated the parking would support. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Harold, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, one more question. And Tom, sorry if you already answered that. I just want to make sure. So the 54-foot face to curb to face, you know what I'm saying, I think you said that's because that's what the cross section is on the other parts of High Point Road.
Right. Yeah. So as you go further north, that's kind of the cross section up to all the way to basically to Watts Road.
Okay, but if that were not the case, we would probably consider something narrower, which might address some of the concerns that other commissioners have brought up. Just it looks too wide with the 10-foot buffered bike lane, the parking that may or may not be used, the 10 plus 14 plus 10 travel lanes.
Right.
Because I'm thinking if we're rebuilding the curb anyway, would it make sense to make this narrower? Like, 7 plus 3, 4, the buffered bike lane. I mean, that's very generous, which in general is a good thing, but in this context, maybe not. You can maybe take out a foot or two on both sides.
Right. I guess my only question is, I think that for the construction that we were kind of assuming we were going off the existing street, but you're right. The curb ends here or here, so it might just change the limits of construction and how we tie in. But we could do that. I mean, the question is just how much that changes the scope of the project on High Point.
I think the issue is the continuity, as the project gets built and then later. Right now we have the 54 on both sides, south of the project and north of the project. So you have those 4 lanes. And we wanted to continue the bike lane on the southbound direction and keep that continuous cross section. That's kind of the issue. So if the whole road was being built now, we would probably do something different, but we have the 2 ends of the development where we have to tie into that existing cross section.
Okay, so maybe, I think this was helpful. So I think maybe now I'm better understanding. So the plan with the parking is you leave the road as it is, you just add the parking to the existing road.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, I think I was confused about that. Okay, thank you. That was helpful.
Thanks, Harold. Chris, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. Sorry. So I feel like we could talk about this a while more and not really come to a clear consensus. So I'm going to throw out maybe where I'm landing, which is to go for the option without parking. I think I'm definitely in favor of the development pattern and a lot of what this is trying to achieve. But like I mentioned earlier, it just feels like a lot to me. It feels pretty unsafe. You know, we know that this is already a road where whatever the speed limit is, folks are driving pretty fast, and just mixing parking and bike lanes in that kind of environment seems not ideal. I appreciate the idea of activating South High Point, but I mean, the majority of South High Point is built out in the current pattern. So I don't think activating what is really a block does a ton to sort of change the character of that corridor in a way that we want. And I hate to get in the way of some additional housing and a nice development pattern. I kind of hope there is a solution that isn't the parking on South High Point, like some sort of, I was asking about an alley earlier. I do wonder if it could be some sort of shared neighborhood street behind there that would accomplish a lot of what the developers want to accomplish. But yeah, so that's kind of where I'm landing right now.
Chris, can I ask, we're looking, it would be helpful to staff to have a motion. Are you making a motion to recommend option one?
Yeah, sure. I will move that we recommend option one.
Is there a second to that?
Second for discussion, McKinney.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second to recommend option one. Chris, did you want to speak any more to your motion?
I think I just did. Thank you.
Okay. All right, great. Alder Harrington McKinney, did you have comments?
No, I think that we've talked about it. It's that just being cognizant of there is tremendous speeding in that area as well. And so I think it is prudent to take in consideration when you're mixing parking, biking, and speeding. And so to be really cognizant of how we build out 10 years in the future.
Thanks, Alder. Harold, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'll start with another question regarding what was brought up about the street activation. And so the blocks that are north of the section that we've been talking about, I think on the map they say TRU1, and that's, I believe, multifamily housing.
Yes. The plans, there's a different sheet, Tom, maybe 1 or 2 pages ahead of this one that shows the general idea for those 2 lots. I believe they have 120 units where you see the D, and up to 200 units for where you see the E. And we have had some high-level conversations with the project team about potentially extending the parking along the west side of High Point Road along the frontage of those lots, with the idea being that there would be an opportunity for ground floor residential units that would have direct access from the sidewalk, might benefit from having convenience parking or parking for deliveries for those. The alternative will probably be absent, the ability to stop or park or stand on the west side of High Point Road along those 2 brown shaded lots, that you'll end up with more of those development sites being devoted to surface parking, areas for deliveries and things like that. So we don't have like specific layouts for how those two lots or blocks will be developed, but I mean, with history as our guide, those will probably have buildings along the perimeters, some amount of surface parking located in between them. And if there was an opportunity to possibly have some of that parking and short-term space for deliveries provided on High Point Road, that would be something that you'd see in other parts of the city, but potentially not here. But the development team's focus has been the frontage of those 20 single-family homes between Velvet Leaf and I believe that's Street E on the development proposal.
Okay, thank you. I think that helps with the question around street activation. I guess I'll then just throw in my thoughts. I guess I'm born here. I think from the urban form side of things, and as we have heard, like the other side of South High Point Road, I think we saw brief street level imagery of that, and there are other places like that. You have fences facing the road. There's basically no activation. So I think I'm very sympathetic to the argument that maybe having front-facing residential units does help with the activation. Activation helps with some of the speeding issues that we have talked about. I'm also going back to the beginning of the meeting. It is 17 additional units, which in the grand scheme of things, I don't know if that makes a difference, but that's easy to say if we always like, well, 17 units here, 17 units there. So I'm quite torn and I'm not totally sure how I'm going to vote on this. I think there's probably some things that could be done to address the speeding. I think definitely it's the reducing it to one lane in each direction, the center turn lane will help a lot. We just need to do a couple additional things, but I think we could probably do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Harold. Alder Bennett, go ahead.
Okay, I have a question and then comments. Just so to clarify, so I completely understand this. What does loading look like if there isn't parking? Or like
is that is that for staff or for the developers or for both?
Staff or developer? I don't know. Whoever can answer that question.
Well, I'll take a shot at it. I think we've heard from the project team that they'll probably redesign that portion of the project to back onto High Point Road. So you'll end up with potentially the development pattern that you see in the lower right-hand corner of Tom's screen, which is the Valley Ridge development across the road, where those lots have a public street on what would be the east side of those lots. The west side of those lots back onto High Point Road. They have no access from High Point Road. So the deliveries are going to be from that interior roadway, which is a full public street. And you would have addressing from that street as well. So that we don't exactly know how they would potentially change the plat, but what they have suggested so far would be something similar to what you see across High Point Road, being mirrored in some way to work with the rest of the Hill Valley project and the topography on the west side of High Point Road.
Okay, I see. Just based off of what I've heard thus far, I think I'm leaning more towards the option 2, the option with the parking. I really appreciate the semi example because it is in such an urban setting of Gorham Street. I've seen how that works, and I can visualize how that might work in this area. And I understand, I'm really sympathetic to the speeding issue, but I do feel like there are ways that we can address that, even with option 2. also, I guess, speaking more from an urban design perspective, I am very sympathetic to the street activation idea, and me visualizing it in my head, it makes a lot more sense to see more the houses being front facing rather than flipped around. And I kind of believe the developers when they say this, and I feel like not that I'm undermining major concerns about speeding. However, I also think that if there were major concerns that we should address, staff wouldn't be neutral on this. So, and then lastly, I know 17 homes can just sound like, oh, it's just 17 homes, but to me, that's 17 families that get to have a home. And if I were to be looking at a line of 17 families right now and tell them that they can't have a home in this area, because we can't find a solution for speeding, I don't want to be that person. So that's why I'm more sympathetic right now to option 2, but I'm very open and willing to hear any other things to change my mind.
Thanks, Alder. Robbie, go ahead.
Well, I think Harold kind of said a lot of the things that I was going to say. I am definitely sympathetic to Chris's concerns that we're trying to pack a lot of things into this roadway. Parking, bike lanes, a path, loading, front-facing homes. And on the other side of the road, you basically have, well, you literally have the neighborhood turning its back on the road. And unfortunately, only one block would be front facing, wouldn't be the whole development along High Point Road. If we had, street activation in the northern part of the development, it might look a little bit more like an actual street. So I understand Chris's concerns, but at the same time, I'm hesitant to say no to trying something. And if the developers think that they can sell front-facing homes here, if they've got some parking in the front, I don't know. I mean, I think High Point in so many ways, because of past development patterns, High Point has just been turned into a giant highway, and I'm not sure that this is going to make a change, but I'm leaning towards letting them try and putting in 17 more homes. I don't know. I'm just, I think our problem is the development pattern that was started 20 years ago on this street, and I'm not sure if there's a way to save it. But I'm kind of leaning towards letting them try. So.
Okay. Thanks, Robbie.
I don't really have anything new to add, I guess, after Harold and Juliana spoke. Okay. Lower my hand.
I can get it for you. There you go. Bill, go ahead.
Thanks, Ann. After listening to some of the discussion, I have changed, I think, a little bit in my mind and prefer the option 2, but with the recommendation that the developer also take a look at modifying the D&E to show parking on this, so that the planning commission gets that at the same time, so that extend the whole length of the development to have parking. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. Alder Harrington McKinney, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Healthy discussion, and I hear the option of 17 additional homes. That's key. I get that, but for me is that how do we address the possibility of bike lanes, speeding, and all of that in that corridor. And I would certainly hope that the developers kind of look at that grade layout, because on the side of the street that my home is, none of the houses are front facing, and I get that, and I would like to see the development be successful, but I have to be realistic in terms of what I see on a daily basis and how that wider area opens up to speeding. That's what's in there now. And so what I'm looking for is what would be the alternative options to have bikers safe, the speeding controlled, and parking amenities for those homes there. And so I'm kind of torn between all of that. I am excited about that development, but the reality of it is that the speed, the wider streets are concerning. It's concerning to the High Point Neighborhood Association president who spoke earlier, and I don't want us to abandon what the possibilities are. And so I want to make sure that that's front facing, and so that those concerns expressed are taken a look at by the developers and also by city staff to see, what are the alternatives that we can use to make sure that, not make sure, but to really decrease the possibility of this being a speeding zone, because people do fly down High Point Road now. And so that's what I'm looking at. I'd rather be safe and sacrifice the 7 homes, but I want to see if we can do both, if that's possible. I'm complete.
Okay, so I've heard a number of people basically ask staff if at least what I'm hearing is if we were to go with option 2, I know that's not the motion now, but this is good discussion. Would there be a way to help reduce speeding through other traffic safety improvements? And I got the impression from Tom and Yang and Chris that would be possible as we move forward, particularly in the future with the either with the resurfacing or the when they do the chip sealing. Would that be right, staff? Whoever would care to answer.
Right. High Point Road is not very unique. There's other kind of dealing with the same problems on other streets, and it's just kind of the comfort versus speed issue. If a street is really comfortable, the speeds are going to be high. So I would say that, when addressing speed, I think activating the street would kind of be fall under trying to address the speed by making it a little less comfortable. I think if we mirror what's on the east side where the backs are facing High Point, we know what the speeds are going to be. They're going to be basically what they are today. If the street is activated, if we're able to make it a little less comfortable, that's probably going to lower the speeds a little bit. And then there are other things that we can do, right, with signals, medians, islands, things like that might help a little bit too.
Okay, thank you. Other discussion? Robbie, go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, I had to turn my video off because my internet is not doing well. I'm actually going to make a substitute motion, and that is to recommend version 2, which has the parking. And if I can get a second, I'll just give you my reasons for that.
Second.
Okay, there's a
Okay.
motion and a second to make a substitute motion recommending option 2.
Thank you. So, after hearing a couple of people speak, I have a feeling that people are leaning that way anyway. And that's why I made the substitute motion, because I don't know if it'll be successful to bring down speeds. But if we do nothing and don't have any front facing, we don't have any street activation, I think that we have doomed High Point to be a high-speed road forever. That's my feeling, because people will see nothing that merits slowing down. So if we want to address speeding, I think this is a possibly small step, but a step at least to deal with that. And after hearing various people struggling with their decision, I'm just having this feeling that the substitute is the will of the body. So that's why I'm making the substitute. So I am done with justifying that.
Thanks, Robbie. Before we move on to Alder Bennett, looks like Alder Govindarajan is in the attendees group. Ariana, could you please move him into the panelists?
Yep, he should be moving over any minute now.
Thank you.
Okay. Alder Bennett, you had your hand up?
It was asked to let in MGR.
Okay. I didn't want to interrupt whoever was speaking to get that across. And Jesse, it's not really appropriate to hear from more from the attendees, the registrants at this point, since we're in discussion with regard to motions. So at this point, we have a substitute motion on the floor. So correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, but I believe we would vote on the substitute motion, correct?
It sounds right to me.
Okay. So right now, the substitute motion is to recommend option 2. And we have already heard from people who have different opinions on this. So I think and we do now have 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 members here. So we would need 5 votes in favor to pass that motion. So Aiden, I think we should have a roll call vote. But first, Harold, did you have more to say?
Yeah, another clarifying question where I think I have the answer, but I'm not totally sure. Regarding, so if we opt for option like without the parking, that does not, we would still consider doing a road diet with 1 lane in each direction with a center turn lane. So this traffic calming measure is independent of whether there will be parking or not.
Right, that's right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Other discussion before we go to a vote? And just to clarify, at this point, we're voting on the substitute motion, which is to recommend option 2, which includes the parking. So Aiden, let's do a roll call.
Juliana Bennett.
Yes.
MGR Govindarajan.
Come back to me. Sorry, just got here.
Sure. Barbara Harrington McKinney.
No.
Robbie Weber.
Yes.
Denise Jess.
Audio now unmuted.
Yes.
Chris McCahill.
No.
Bill Bremer,
Yes.
Harold Clemes,
Yes.
and back to MGR Govindarajan.
Yes.
So that's 6 yeses and 2 nos.
So that would mean that the substitute motion recommending option 2, which includes parking, passed. Okay, very healthy discussion, which everybody heard all of the things that we can consider that aren't necessarily shown in the documents right now that we're seeing, and some things that can be considered in the future with regard to improving traffic safety, potentially reducing speeding. So thanks everybody for really excellent discussion. Any last comments before we move on? Okay.
Madam Chair, I will be exiting.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Alder. Okay. We move on to item 3, which is East Madison Bikeways. Do we have anybody registered to speak for that item?
No, we do not.
Okay. Renee, go ahead.
All right. Thank you. I am just gonna find the right screen. I'm just here, sorry for my throat here tonight. Just here for some feedback on this project, which now I cannot find in my file. Oh, here we go, documents. Sorry, I was having a little problem here with my Zoom finding my item. Let me close back out. So I just need feedback on these 3 items. Oh, Yang has his hand up.
Go ahead, Yang. Did you have a thing?
Yeah, well, Renee is looking. I just want to thank her for stepping here when she's sick. So
Yes.
whether she want to delay this, she said she will, just come here and present to the commission. So I want to thank her for that.
Yeah, thank you so much. It sounds like it's not easy for you to talk tonight, Renee.
Apparently, I think it's gotten worse as the day has gone on. That's quite sad.
Yeah, that's worse than this afternoon.
Okay. This is the wrong. Let me just.
If you need to stop ever and take a sip of water or whatever, just go ahead
Yes.
and do that.
Okay. Finally found the right file. Here we go. Let me make this bigger here. So we came here once before, Aaron Canton from engineering and myself, and we the original plan was to build this connection to let people exit East Washington, where we have the flex or the peak hour lane. So we had originally been looking at having it on East Washington, but as you can see here on the right side, we have a very narrow right of way. It had trees, poles, and lights. So we suggested if people were interested, we would take a look at this Commercial Avenue cul-de-sac because it already had a worn path. But we need to get some survey data because it is a very steep incline. So what we wanted to get before we put a lot of work into design is which of these 3 options, all which are feasible, none of which are without some real negatives, you think would be the best for us to continue doing some design work on. I think we can come back then. We would have more information on kind of cost, sort of implications for trees and things like that. But we didn't want to put a ton of design work in without getting a little bit of input, only because none of these are kind of ideal solutions. Here you'll see on Commercial Avenue. So we got the surveying in. We could get to a 5% grade, but it would require an extremely tight curve. So that is not something that we typically do, but it is a way to meet that 5% grade so that it is ADA accessible. The other option at this location is to have a steeper grade, with it being over 5%, more in the 7 to 8, we would need to have a landing spot every 30 feet. No matter what, I'll go back to the other one. You'll see we will have to do some tree clearing. Once we get into it, we'd have a better idea of replanting options that might exist, and exactly how many. But for now, we know that they would have to come down. There are a lot of trees through this whole area. Same here, we would have to take down trees. We might be able to get a few more in, but it also might not be that many with it being kind of at that diagonal and having to put in landings. So also not ideal. So if I go back, you can kind of see on the left, that is the area that we're talking about there. You can see that it's a pretty significant drop. And then on the right, you can see, obviously, if we stick with East Washington, we are going to be relocating a lot of things. We are also going to have to see what trees can come down. It's probably going to be harder to replant with widening that sidewalk out. We do come down then, as you can see, there's kind of some parking lots, car dealerships that don't give us a lot of room to work with. So just want to know if you have kind of one you'd like us to work on more, and then we could come back with what the total implications are for that one. But it is kind of a complicated project, so we did not want to kind of spend a lot of time on design work until we got a feel. All right, I'm going to stop sharing now.
Okay, Robbie, go ahead.
So I guess my first question is the general idea here, you said something about getting people off East Washington. Is it because they will not have a dedicated bike facility on East Washington? And we're trying to give them an option to use neighborhood streets. Is that why we're trying to do that?
Yeah, so this is one of the areas where the where during peak hours, that's usually a parking bike lane, but that is not during peak hours. So we want people to be able to, during that time period, have an easy way to exit the bike lane and get into the neighborhood streets, get into Horde or Starkweather, depending on where they're going.
Okay, because I was just kind of looking at the map and I was trying to figure out, why we needed the connection, but it looks like it's just to allow people to get onto those neighborhood streets. That's
correct. Yeah.
That's the goal of this project here. Okay. All right. Well, that was that was my major question. Since I have the floor, I guess I'll just say, well, I guess I guess I do have another question, and that is, how, is it the trees? Is it mostly the kind of alley trees that grow up where there's nothing else there? Or are there, big, nice trees? What kind of trees are we talking about here? Or is it just kind of a scrubby alley type tree?
There's actually a surprising number of pine trees back there. Some of them are kind of probably scrubby because there's a lot of them. There's probably too many of them for the overall health, but I'm not a forester. But I feel like that's probably the case. But they do really screen the multifamily unit. They're a commercial. So, the fact that some of them are kind of scrubby pine trees, they probably provide a lot of screening because they're a more full kind of tree and they're very thick in there. So they do provide that benefit. I'm sure there are some trees in there that are not in perfect health, but it's kind of a mix of trees, not things that maybe we would typically plant anymore. Like pine trees, not aware that that's something that we do very commonly anymore.
Okay. As I said, I just was kind of curious whether we're talking, oaks or just box elders and, things like that. So, okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Robbie. Harold, go ahead.
Thank you. some of this you might only be able to answer after doing the actual surveying. So with a very tight curve, I was in my mind trying to think about where do we have like very tight turns on a multi-use path. The one that came to mind is out by High Point Road that we just talked about, near the Beltline when you come up behind the Princeton Club and have to make that almost U-turn. Do you have a sense of how this would compare?
I mean, it would probably be at least that tight. It's definitely, yeah, it's quite tight. I mean, there's not a lot of room to work with there, unfortunately. So it would be kind of like one of the tightest, like more like an older school ramp on a bridge or something might be for a path.
And it would have the 5% even in the turn.
It would, yeah. So that's kind of how we can get that 5% that whole way, is to have a really kind of, and to kind of get down to the road there and stay in the right of way that we have. So
yeah, this does not sound very, that does not sound good to me.
No, lots of cons for all options.
Yeah, and that's the other question. Do you have a sense like how much above 5% the other ramp option would be?
It's pretty steep out there. It's definitely going to be several. And so there's definitely going to need to be a number of landing spaces, which impacts the number of trees that we would ultimately take down. And it's unclear to me then how many can we replant. It probably ends up like depending a little bit on the final design.
Right, and it also reduces the usefulness for people biking. If it's like an 8% grade, that people
right, like
use
right, it's not as nice. I mean, it's a and obviously then like there more conflicts with pedestrians at that steeper slope coming off the street, and then especially since it's probably not going to be highly used, you would just kind of be taken by surprise when there are other people using it.
And then the other big picture question in the previous slide, narrow right of way with trees, poles, lights in right of way. I mean, is there potential to fix, like move some street lights, move some traffic signal poles and fix it that way?
So we don't have a lot of space. I think it could really become a pretty expensive project because we might need to buy, we might need to buy a little bit of buy some space, right, from property owners. And we're probably, I mean, I think the worst part is we're going to be really close to East Washington. We're not going to be able to have a very significant terrace space there. So, yeah, we really have not found a great solution to this particular one. Each one has a lot of, has its own drawback, each one different.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I guess this highlights the issue that, I mean, big picture going back, we planned BRT, we knew that some entities were not able to preserve the bike lane, and we were like, well, we'll fix it later. We have these ideas how we can improve connectivity, but then once you actually do that, well, it is sometimes not easy. All right, thank you.
Renee, let me clarify. You want to, did you have something else, Harold?
I guess we were trying to collect feedback. I mean, yeah, both options seem bad, which maybe means we should explore both in more detail to see which one is less bad in execution.
Well, to that point, all of them have a lot of cons. So in reality, are you asking for 4 options? One of the 3, or just not do anything? I mean, is just not do anything something that we should consider? So I just throw that at you.
Yeah, I feel very uncomfortable with doing nothing, given, that bike lane isn't there all the time. So I guess if you have one that you think has the lowest cons, we would explore it more and do additional design work, look more at the tree impacts and things like that, and come back. But I think that we didn't want to spend the resources to look at all 3. If we could find something that we would rate as our top pick here. Now, if we bring it back and it turns out to be much like we just can't live with it, we could then explore other ones. I don't think that's off the table, but I think just from a staff resource point of view, we'd kind of like to focus in on one. Ideally, we would get this into a contract to construct in the spring with some of the other East Madison Bikeways work. But this one is probably going to be the hardest. Some of the other ones we already have through the process. We'd kind of like to dial in on one, but or you can let Aaron, you can just give me your feedback and Aaron and I can come up with a recommendation, I guess. But we wanted to bring it to you before we kind of got too deep into this.
Okay. Since I don't see any hands up, I'll just continue with another question. It seems like the option with the curve has the lowest grade. Am I remembering that correctly?
It does.
So yeah, so the steep curve is a con, but to me the lower grade seems better for folks to navigate. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I think the upside is that if you're on a bike or even if you're walking using a mobility device, that 5% is going to be much more manageable. When you get up above that, it is hard. I mean, obviously there's a desire line. People have been like kind of scrambling up that bank, but it's a bit of a scramble to get up there. It's definitely for people who are strong walkers.
Yeah. So I'm interested in other people's thoughts, but to me that seems like it would make it more usable by more people or more easily used by more people to have the lower grade, even though there's the steep curve. Although I'm interested in what other people have to, obviously what other people have to say about that. So other thoughts? In terms of what you think has the least amount of cons or what staff should pursue. Denise?
Audio now. Yeah, thanks, Anne. So just maybe I missed this. So the one with the 5% grade and the tight curve, is that a curve that's navigable by somebody with a mobility device, a scooter or a power chair?
So that would definitely be our goal. And I think, if we couldn't make that, then it's not really a workable option, but we think that we could make that work.
Yeah, that would be, thanks, Renee. That would be the thing that would be most important from my perspective, is that someone can use that space. So if that's the case, then I could support that one.
Okay, thanks, Denise. Other comments? Okay, Carl, go ahead.
Yeah, since I was asked to make a single choice, I think probably exploring more the one with the tight turn seems like the more promising option. I guess there's a reason why it makes that bend and meets up with the turning circle where it does on the drawing, rather than closer to the lot line.
Yeah, there is. Aaron's not here. He could probably explain like kind of how it's designed, and that might need to change a little bit as we get going because, he did a really simplistic based on the information that we had so far. So he would, if that's the one we want to go with, he would do additional design work to see exactly how we would land that. But that's what he thinks it would need to be to meet 5% that whole distance.
Okay. That could potentially be tighter, or it could be not as tight if we end up lucky.
Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, doing nothing is not an option because, as I said, there's a desire line. People are already walking there. So yeah, we got to accommodate that. Oops.
Very helpful. Thanks. Bill, go ahead.
Thanks, Ann. My vote would be to study the tight curve. I like the 5%. Much more friendly. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Chris?
Yeah, I just agree. I think if we're going to do this, it's for accessibility. So it ought to be as accessible as it can, because we know folks who are capable are already figuring out how to do it anyway. So, and I guess just one question or observation is that with this option, I assume you would be thinking of adding some sort of step directly to that crosswalk so that folks who can use the step would go directly to that crosswalk like they're probably doing now.
Oh yeah, we could definitely take a look at that as a part of it for more of the pedestrians who would then, more people would hopefully then use it versus just the people who kind of feel fit enough to scramble up that bank. So that's a good suggestion.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm hearing folks favor the first option with the steep curve and the lower grade of 5%. Anybody feel differently? Okay, I'm seeing no hands. So is that what you needed then, Renee?
Yeah, that is exactly what I needed. So we'll start working more on that detailed design. Not sure when we'll be back, but it's definitely something that's on Aaron's priority list. So thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking that I should have had your items next to each other, but maybe this will give you an opportunity to rest your voice in between times. So thanks so much. Let's go to item 4, which is the Metro Transit Route B North Side Charger installation. Mike.
Good evening, everybody. I'm gonna share my screen here.
If I could just ask, do we have anybody registered to speak on this item? Aiden or Ariana? I don't hear anybody saying anything. Well, just go ahead, Mike.
Okay, feel free to interrupt me if you need to.
Okay, thanks.
Talking about a plan that we have that we'd like to kind of move forward, called Northside Bus Charger and Route B service changes. So this is an informational item, but we're looking for your feedback as we develop these plans. We had a public information meeting on Monday. Didn't get a big turnout, but the weather was poor and the service changes would affect a relatively small portion of the north side. So it's not too surprising, but wanted to give the Transportation Commission a look at what's coming down the pipe. This does include some engineering design and a public works construction project. And so, you know, I don't want to put us in the situation of getting too far down the road and then having to back up. So I want to get ahead of this one. So we have some challenges on Route B that we would like to address with this project. So Route B, it's an electrified bus route, part of the BRT system, uses the BRT stations between East Campus and Milwaukee North stations. It's an all-electric route, but it has no on-route charging, unlike the other electric bus routes. So what happens is typically the Route B buses only get 2 round trips before the battery is depleted and it needs to get swapped with another bus from the Hanson Road garage. And so that's an operational challenge for us. Is, you know, we're trying to keep up with having enough drivers, having enough buses, having everything, having all of the resources we need to provide the service reliably on the day-to-day basis. And so this is just something that's been a challenge for us to do all these bus swaps to keep the batteries topped up. We also have an end-of-line layover on the north side on Route B at Troy and Northport. It's a loop, and so the layover is at one point kind of at the beginning of the loop. And so what happens is a lot of people have to wait through the layover and then, you know, and then continue as the bus continues as a southbound trip. So for example, they take the B up to the north side and then it stops on Troy and Northport. And then they wait while the driver takes a break or whatever. And then the bus continues along. We did some things to kind of reduce that burden, but I think more needs to be done. And then finally, just to keep this in mind, North-South BRT planning is in progress. This is not part of the North-South BRT system, but this charger would be ultimately used by the North-South BRT when Route B becomes a Metro Rapid route. So we want to stay consistent with the locally preferred alternative that was adopted for Route B, and we want to make sure that everything is consistent with that planning work that's ongoing. This is the existing Route B, so it goes in a clockwise direction. So coming northbound, it comes up Northport, turns left onto Troy Drive. Apologize, these street labels are kind of hard to see. The layover right now is kind of right under where it says Nobel Park there, and then it wraps around the loop and continues to the south. It goes through the Central Wisconsin Center. And so, looking at kind of where the end of line layover and charging could be, we've kind of identified this spot at Northport and Kennedy. That is on the far end of the loop, so that minimizes the number of people who are traveling around the loop after the layover and have to wait for that layover. This is what our on-route chargers look like. We have 4 of these that are on our system now that support mostly Route A. Route F uses it at Junction Road as well. But you can see the bus parks here at the end of the line. If the bus has 10 or 15 minutes or so at the end of the line, they are able to basically recharge to recover the charge that it lost on the trip, on that particular trip. This is a high capacity charger. It's a 450 kilowatt charger. So it charges about 3 times as fast compared to the chargers that are in our depot. And the intent is to really bring up the charge in a short period of time while the driver's taking a break at the end of the line. We've had pretty good luck and experience with these particular chargers that are built by ABB and installed by New Flyer. So this would basically be the concept to add these at the end of Route B. This is a close-up view of that location that I was talking about. Northport is the street that's in the main view there, and then Kennedy Road is the cross street. We've identified this extra piece of right-of-way, and I don't know exactly why the right-of-way and the terrace is so wide at this particular location. I can guess as probably intended for eventual expansion of Northport Drive, but that's just a hunch. But anyway, there's quite a bit of excess right-of-way there, and so that's where we envision where we can have a pull-out, relatively straightforward place where we can have a terminal for Route B, and then everybody going to and from this area, which is a pretty busy stop for us. Then they could get on the bus and not have to wait through the layover. We looked at a couple other locations and options, but really none of them compared remotely favorable to this one, just because of the straightforward nature of it. Now, one problem that you see here is that Route B goes southbound, whereas this is on the northbound side of Northport Drive. And so that will require us to reverse the loop. I'm getting ahead of myself, but you can kind of see where this is going. This is a pretty simple depiction of what we plan in this area where there's excess right-of-way. So there'd be a curbside bus pullout so that the buses can charge and lay over outside of the main flow of traffic. We need that so that we're not blocking traffic on this artery, but we also need the charging to be kind of off of the street. That prevents the charging equipment from potentially getting hit by some taller vehicles. So it needs to kind of be out of the way. And then we'd have some regular bus stop facilities that you'd expect: concrete boarding area, shelter, bench, stuff like that. And then this small building here would support charging infrastructure, the charging, the actual chargers themselves, the electrical equipment that would provide the charge for the buses would live in that building. In addition, we would put 2 bathrooms for our bus operators to use. That's another thing that we're trying to improve on is having bathroom facilities at the end of the line for our drivers. So we would include 2 bathrooms for our drivers in the building. This is similar to what exists at Junction Road Park and Ride and Sun Prairie Park and Ride. However, I think this building could be a little bit smaller. Those buildings were designed to accommodate 3 chargers. We would never have the need to have more than 1, possibly 2 chargers here. So I think the building could be a little bit smaller. That would save cost and have it, not be as large. We're working with the DOT on this. There's some concern about having a building within the right of way too close to the road. Still working on those details, but I think that can come together. So now I'd like to shift gears just a little bit and talk about the service change implications to adding this charger. So here you can see it says layover and charging at Northport and Kennedy. So that was the location that we were looking at. So the biggest change here is reversing the direction of the loop. So rather than going clockwise, we would be going counterclockwise. Route B would travel westbound on Northport, stop at this new facility on the northwest corner of Northport and Kennedy. That's where the driver would take a break and then the line and so forth. And then the bus would turn left on Knutson, left on Green, continue to Troy Drive, and then turn right on Northport and go back down towards the Isthmus. We have quite a few bus stops on the inside of the loop. All of those bus stops would need to be closed, and new bus stops would need to be created on the outside of the loop. We would propose to have fewer bus stops on the outside of the loop than we currently do on the inside of the loop. The stops are a little bit closer together than we typically like them on the inside of the loop. So there is some of that. All of these locations generally are consistent with the locally preferred alternative that was adopted with North-South Bus Rapid Transit, LPA, with the exception of these two just in between school and Troy Northport. I forget what the name of that street is. I think it starts with a G. But anyway, those are not included in the North-South BRT LPA, but we would go ahead and put those in to have our typical quarter-mile bus stop spacing that we would have, and those would presumably exist until BRT gets built and we have the BRT stations and BRT-like stop spacing in this area. We do have another bus stop at Troy and Leardall. I don't believe that one is in the North-South BRT LPA. But again, that would provide our typical quarter-mile spacing for local service on Troy Drive. One other change is, and this was planned anyway, but just to bring it up again, with the Knutson Avenue reconstruction, that would provide us with the ability to have bus service on Knutson and Green rather than snaking through the Central Wisconsin Center. We are still planning on doing that. That doesn't really affect the stops that much because the stops are basically at the intersections anyway. But that provides a much better operating environment for us. Those will be modern streets with pavement structures that will support the bus better. It eliminates a handful of turns. The bus stops will be better, more typical urban bus stops. We also get to take advantage of that project to have those bus stops built with that project. I think we get 3 of those built with that project, as well as the Green Avenue resurfacing. Some of the bus stops will exist already because they were bus stops before Transit Network redesign. They existed for Route 21, which no longer exists. So we get a couple of them that already exist. And then we'll have to build a couple of them, and so we would have concrete boarding pads for all of these locations. Another concern we had was sidewalk. There is missing sidewalk in the area. For example, you can see it on Troy Drive west of the railroad tracks. A lot of this missing sidewalk is going to be filled in with various projects. That sidewalk is planned to be installed with the railroad bridge project. I believe that's planned for 2026. But when we build the bus stop at Troy and Leardall, we would include kind of our typical treatment for that area, which would be a bus stop boarding pad and then a crosswalk, so people could cross over to the north side. A lot of the other sidewalk along Knutson Green, and that area is being added with the Knutson reconstruction project. And then the sidewalk along the east side of Green there is doesn't really have a lot of basically everybody there would be going to the Mendota Mental Health, which is on the west side of the street. There's really not a lot on the east side. So we feel like the bus stop would be better on that side anyway. So we think we'll be, all of this area where the bus stops will have sidewalks by the time we're done. So just a summary, Troy Northport loop will be reversed to counterclockwise. I just put this in here because I figure somebody might see this presentation and not hear that conversation. Terminal moved to Northport and Kennedy, route moved from the Central Wisconsin Center to the public streets. Knutson Green, bus stops on the inside of the loop closed and new bus stops created on the outside of the loop. So this is just a summary of north-south bus rapid transit. So as I mentioned, we're staying consistent with the locally preferred alternative that was adopted. Now the LPA did have these arrows indicating that the route would travel in the clockwise manner that it does. I think our intent with this map was simply to illustrate that the route would go in one direction here, not necessarily that it would go in any specific direction. So we consider this to still be consistent with the locally preferred alternative. And then just to mention, we have a couple other of these projects that I already mentioned, but we are coordinating with these projects that we have the Knutson Drive Knutson Drive reconstruction. We have the Green Avenue resurfacing, and then we have this railroad bridge that will widen that bridge and install crosswalks and bike lanes on Troy Drive. So we're coordinating with those projects. That's all I have. Again, looking for feedback and any comments, questions you might have.
Thanks, Mike. Let me just clarify with Aiden or Ariana, we don't have anybody registered to speak from the public on this item. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And let me just clarify, this is just for review and feedback tonight. You would come back to TC for approval with regard to the referenced service changes.
That's correct.
So just to make sure we're all on the same page here. We will have some service changes on the December 11th agenda, and it's possible this one might be included, but that's yet to be determined. So comments or questions for Mike? Harold.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think a lot of this makes sense. I just have a couple of questions. How are we paying for this?
Right. So this would be funded by a LONO grant that we received. So we applied for a low no emissions grant for the 2023 cycle. That was originally intended to install bus en route chargers for at Epic campus and also at the UW campus. We've since realized that those locations are harder than we thought, and so one of them is being reallocated to this location.
Thank you. That makes sense. You said no BRT platforms will be built with that. Is eventually at Northport and Kennedy, is that going to be a full station? I know in the loop we're not doing the full with raised platforms or whatever, but I think you mentioned this is possibly a higher ridership station. And so how is that going to work out?
Yes, so the station would be constructed with North-South BRT in the same location.
Okay, so that would build it in some kind of way that can happen with, it would be compatible.
Yep.
Okay. Operational impact of having to pull out on busy Northport Street, like our bus is going to be able to get out of the pull out after they have charged?
Yeah, I'm not concerned with that. Typically we don't like having bus pullouts, but having buses pull out into traffic because they're delayed. But the end of the line is kind of a different scenario. there is a traffic signal there, so the traffic signal will create gaps for us. The real operational challenge is doing that stop after stop after stop on a busy street on a street like East Washington. At the end of the line, it's sort of inevitable.
Okay. And it seems like from the drawing that there really is so much public right of way. I'm thinking like long term, if Northport ever gets rebuilt and whatever gets an off-street path or something, there just seems to be enough space that even with the charging infrastructure and the restroom, there still seems to be a lot of space to work with. Is that right?
Yeah, I think there should be enough space. As I alluded to, I think this is a street that has WSDOT jurisdiction, and so I think they had some concerns about clearance between the roadway and the building, which they would consider this. Their typical clearance, I don't remember the number, but it was very high. And then I said, we have many examples of buildings that are closer to the street than their typical number for a highway like this. And so we're working through that, but I think it'll be all right. But we will need keep in mind, we will need some clearance between the building and the street.
Yeah, and I guess I'm also thinking behind the stop, say if we do it like in Seago, where we have the bike lane going behind the bus stop, if we ever end up with something protected there, it seems like on the other side, there's still plenty of space to the properties there. Maybe.
Yeah. I think we'll look at those details as we get closer along. But yes, I do think there's space to do basically what we would want to do there. It's not very tight on the north side. On the south side, it kind of is. There's an apartment building there that's relatively close to the street, and we wanted to avoid doing any kind of right of way takes. But yeah, there's quite a bit of real estate there to do what we'd want to do.
Okay, thanks. That's what I had.
Thanks, Harold. Alder Govindarajan, go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you, Mike, for this presentation. Real quick, wanted to ask you about the UW recharging stations. You briefly talked about that. Can you just share more information about why that didn't work out? And then second question is, I know a couple of the 80 buses during peak hours might have the Bendy buses on there. How do those get charged? Where does that happen? If you can talk about that, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. So what we kind of found out with Route 80, with the different patterns that it operates with, the uncertainty of where the route might go, as well as the challenge of fitting this building and station near someplace like the Memorial Union or near the hospital. There's just a lot of question marks. And then because it's a lower speed route, because of the way that it operates, it just doesn't need it as much as Route B does, because the route goes slower, and because the buses naturally kind of get exchanged anyway because the service levels kind of vary a little bit more throughout the day. And then so what we'd like to do with that is just drive it back to our shop at Ingersoll Street and use our charging infrastructure that will be in place at Ingersoll Street to be able to cycle those buses. So we're still interested in potentially having charging on-route charging somewhere on the UW property, but it didn't. The need seems to be not as high compared to Route B, and the challenges seem to be a bit more complex than the Route B. So we're starting here with Route B.
That makes sense. Thank you. And just to clarify, I always assumed that the BRT buses were running on Route 80 during peak hours. Are they not running, or are they running?
They are. The 60-foot electric buses are running on Route 80 currently. We're sort of cycling into that service, so it's a bit of a transition. We are still kind of breaking in the new buses. As you may be aware, we have issues with our doors where they're closing and then not or they're opening and then not closing. So we have a number of buses that are down for that reason, or just have not been commissioned yet. So we're still kind of cycling into having those buses on Route 80. So it's a little bit of a transition time, but we will have those buses available for Route 80. And, because this charger reduces our need for having more buses to run Route B, this will help us free up more buses that will be available for Route B as well as Route 75, which they're promised to.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much.
It's all kind of connected.
Thanks. Denise, go ahead.
Audio now on. Yeah, thanks, Ann. Thanks, Mike. With the change of the route, if I understand it, it doesn't go through Central Wisconsin Center anymore. What impact do you perceive that will have on the workforce of that for the folks who work there?
Yeah, good question. I think we anticipate it to have a very little impact for the workforce at Central Wisconsin Center. And the reason is they're basically replaced by bus stops that are one very short block away. So, that bus stop on Murphy, just east of Green is, just a couple 100 feet east of Green. So it's really not moving that far. The same with the one on the north side of the Central Wisconsin Center. We will try to reach out to them and get their take on it. But that's that's consistent with most of our other routes. We typically don't drive through parking lots like this. But also, this is these stops are not utilized as well as I think they could be. And so I think the other side of the coin is putting them out on the public streets. I think they will be easier for people to find, regardless of where they're going from or to. So we see it as a positive outcome all around. There'll be more modern, fixed bus stops with kind of the typical infrastructure that you see. We'll try to get perhaps a bench, something like that out there. The current condition of those bus stops is, I'm going to say it's quite poor. That there's a kind of a gravel shoulder. It's pretty sad looking, and so I think we'd like to have some nicer looking infrastructure on the public streets.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And so, yeah, when you reach out to them, I think putting that positive face on it, how it's beneficial, maybe might help reduce any potential concern about their stops moving. So thanks. I really appreciate that.
Video now stop.
Thank you.
Thanks, Denise. Anybody have any other comments or questions for Mike? And again, we'll see the service change request at a future meeting, possibly as soon as December. Okay, I'm seeing no hands. So thank you very much, Mike. Did you have anything else that you needed from us?
I don't. You said it correctly. We'll be back with a service change proposal. It might be at the December one. I'm going to talk to Mick and see how he wants to handle that. But you are correct. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, now items 5 and 6 ended up being so related that Renee did one presentation deck for both items. So if there is no objection, I recommend that we consider those two items together and have one discussion. Any objection? I would note, in case anybody from the public registered to speak on item 5 and on item 6, they would get 3 minutes with their comments on 5 and 6. So they would actually end up with 6 minutes, but that would have happened if we had handled them as separate items anyway. So in case that happens, I just wanted to mention that. And I believe we do have people registered to speak. Do we not, Aiden?
We do. We have several.
I beg your pardon?
We do. We have several people.
Okay. All right. So we'll hear from Renee, and then you can rest your voice for a while we hear from the public, and then we can go to questions and discussion.
Right. And I'll just mention that I have Colleen Hayes, who is our pedestrian bicycle outreach specialist with me. She does a lot of our kind of engagement around etiquette, things like that. So I wanted her here because she might be able to answer some questions. And then obviously Attorney Eric Finch is here for legal related questions as well. And I know he had some documents that he added in. So I'm just gonna give a really brief presentation. Let me just bring that up. All right, here we go. We have talked about this. Actually, it hasn't even been a full year this time because we discussed it in February. So I did try to focus on some kind of different things this time. But once again, talking a bit about path speed limits, it was, there was a lot of publicity around that. Some things have come up of interest to alders around our sidewalk ordinance and just some concerns about, you know, electric devices that are out there sharing the sidewalk. And then there's just obviously always with new technology emerging concerns. You know, kind of in talking to a different attorney before Eric was assigned to this, the feeling was that the way the state statute is written, the default speed limit would be 25 on a path when it's not posted. We do have some signage encouraging people to travel slower, some etiquette work, some pop-up signs that we've done. You've heard about some of these things, but that's kind of where we're at. Obviously with infrastructure, when it comes here, we're looking at what is a good width. How can we have a wider array of networks so that everyone isn't in the same place? But that's kind of where we're at now. Speed is not a new concern, but it does come up regularly. So there was a recent article, an editorial that in the State Journal. However, as you probably remember, our complaints aren't just about e-bike users, but are also about other bike users who travel what people perceive as too fast for a given situation. But of course, I heard recently that in 2022, more people bought e-bikes than bought electric cars. They're becoming much more popular. I was in a webinar where they said many people were saying that who didn't own e-bikes, that they were thinking of buying one in the next 5 years. And of course, class 3 e-bikes do provide assistance up to 28. And of course, bikes are being sold that are not legal, e-bikes in Wisconsin, which is its own issue. And of course, these days with the internet, it's possible to learn how to hack a legal e-bike to let them go faster. So those are real issues. I mean, that information is out there, how to hack cars too, right? Like we live in kind of a world where there is a lot of information that you can find if you're looking for it. This is just the state statute, the 3 classes of e-bikes. This is a pretty common kind of statute. Class 1 and 2 do give assistance only up to 20. Class 2 does not have to be pedaled. And then class 3 is the one that goes up to 28. Now, last time I came and I talked about a few places, a lot of places maybe that had a speed limit, but maybe changed it or had more of a, not an actual speed limit, but there definitely are places that do. Boulder, for instance, the Wisconsin DNR has some rules about e-bikes. And then more recently, Albuquerque has set a max speed limit of 20. They can set it lower if the Parks Department, which oversees their paths, feels that's appropriate. But they also do some targeted enforcement. So that's a little bit different than most places. Now I was looking to see if we had any data around speed, and we did have some, but it was from 2019. So you can see here, kind of east of Lakeside. But we don't have anything currently, and we know since 2019, there are a lot more people riding after the pandemic, people who bought bikes, and there are a lot more e-bikes since 2019. But we do have that, and we could do another speed study in the future if that's something that's desirable to the committee. Now jumping to the sidewalk ordinance, right now, state statute prohibits sidewalk riding except where a municipality has an ordinance allowing it. We have an ordinance that does allow bicycles on a sidewalk, except where a building abuts the sidewalk. So, think of a commercial district where people would walk out the door right onto the sidewalk. That is kind of the situations where it's not allowed. We also interestingly have a sidewalk that addresses skateboards, allowing them on the sidewalk, but that is all that we have right now. We have heard growing concerns on sidewalks, both users traveling too fast, not yielding, not calling out to say that they're going to pass, being used. And I'll let Colleen maybe just talk a little bit about the issues with the abutting the sidewalk and our streeteries.
Yeah, I've been talking with some of our right down on the Capitol Square, especially when people come on their bikes off of State Street and they want to go, they don't want to go all the way around because maybe they want to go to, I don't know, Cooper's Tavern or something, or Rare Steakhouse, or let's say Old Fashioned, and then they bike down and then they bike past Rare and Cooper's. So I've been talking to some of those folks, some of the owners there, and they've just really been struggling about getting bikers to walk their bikes. We do have some small signage, and so I think if we could figure out a way to maybe increase our signage, and I know it gets tricky with laws about sandwich boards and things like that, but having more of that, it's been as I've been told, startling, which I can speak. I used to work at a bar on the square and I've been knocked into by a bike, but it's been startling some of the servers. So does it happen all the time? I went out there and I saw it, I didn't see anyone get knocked into. I did see people walking their bike. I explained to them, this is why you should probably be riding their bike. Could you walk your bike? This is why. Most people seem amenable. Some people told me, are we allowed to swear at Transportation Commission meetings? Some people told me to F off,
Yeah.
So that's one thing that really is problematic for downtown, right on the square. I've noticed it. But people can't ride. They would have to go all the way around the square to get to where they'd want to go.
All right. Just gonna try to get this. There we go. And then of course there are always other emerging concerns with technology. There's all kinds of new types of devices. It used to be all about the Segways, and there's hoverboards and one wheels and electric skateboards, and every kind of thing is, probably someone is creating it. And the question of where can they or should they be used? What about bikes that are not within our statutory? Can they be operated? At what point do they need a driver's license and a vehicle registration? So I think it raises a lot of questions like that. And then there's been other safety concerns, particularly on the national level, a lot of attention on the safety of youth e-bike users. Some places, if you go to like a middle school, like all the kids will have e-bikes. It's pretty crazy. It's definitely a bigger problem in other places, but obviously they're using them. They may be using bikes that were cheaper, maybe not particularly safe. Obviously some of them are single crashes. Sometimes they're with other people. There was a crash between two bicyclists in Florida that was like a lot of attention, and that particular kind of island banned e-bikes because of it. And then obviously some of them are your traditional motor vehicle crashes. As more kids get on bikes, obviously there could be more crashes happening with motor vehicles as well. Obviously, there's some larger cities in the US, like New York City, and lots of European cities that have high usage of e-bikes for delivery services that are cause for some concern as well in those cities as that's adopted. But obviously, it also has a plus. And then there has been, of course, ongoing safety concerns from the beginning with e-scooters, but also with e-bikes, just overall safety, as people maybe who haven't ridden for a long time get back on a bike. And it has a little more power. They're not quite used to it. They're not totally comfortable on a bike yet. So that always comes up as well, just as more people get back into biking. I think no matter the type of bike, that can be some challenges related to safety. And then I just put in the link to the last two meetings because I tried to talk about kind of different things from our February meeting as we kind of decide what direction or what our next steps might be on this. And I'm going to stop sharing. I feel like maybe Eric might want to say something.
Yeah, I will just add in. There were some materials in the Legistar file for one of the two items, which is just a list for the most part of some of the relevant statutes that govern various micromobility devices as we think of them. Sorry, it's bedtime at my house, so you may hear some children protesting. But essentially, that's not a perfect tool or anything, but that's kind of a reference chart that Assistant City Attorney Jason Donker put together that we've been using as we've been discussing various approaches to some of these issues. The law on this is still developing, and it's already in many ways very convoluted. If you look through that, you can see that there are quite a few different types of vehicles, and it can be confusing what exactly a vehicle becomes at various points. If you break an e-bike, for example, up to 28 miles an hour, it just becomes a class 3 e-bike. But arguably between 29, if its maximum speed assisted speed is 29 to 30 miles an hour, it's arguably a moped for those 2 miles an hour. But if it's generating assistance past 30 miles an hour, then it's likely a motorcycle effectively, and needs to be registered and ridden as such. So in terms of how we can approach these things, maybe some of those reference materials are useful, but the TC can let us know if there are approaches that it would like to see, and we can certainly make those, draft those ordinances for Common Council review. There's, I think Renee and I discussed, there are possibilities, things like speed studies on the commuter paths. But then that may take away precious resources from speed studies on the road. And I think the one other point I had is that it may be that signage on some of our shared paths, some of our commuter paths may be desirable. And I think the thought being that it's not going to slow everybody down by any means. But if it maybe makes a few people more comfortable, if it makes a few people more cautious in their riding, maybe that would be worth it. But that's up to this commission. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, why don't we hear from the people that we have registered to speak? And Aiden, I guess I would just suggest that we go through the registrants for item 5 and then go through the registrants for item 6, just to put some sort of order into it.
That sounds good.
So first off, we have Jesse Dirkman of Tomahawk Trail opposes and wishes to speak.
Okay, Jesse, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Hi, my name is Jesse Dirkman, and my husband and I are bicycle commuters. In 2018, we bought a pedal-assisted cargo bike. We chose a Class 3 motor, not because of the speed, but because it's the one that didn't hurt my knees. And buying an e-bike was life-changing. I can make an 8-mile round trip to do some shopping that I never would have accomplished on my regular bike. My husband now bikes to work. For him, the distance wasn't the issue, but the desire to show up in a professional and presentable state, not sweaty and in need of a shower from all of the hills between here and Middleton. I also have a chronic health condition, and riding an e-bike on the shared use path gives me so much more freedom. I have more mobility, I can replace longer car trips, and I can keep pace with more cyclists on the trail, as opposed to being passed by almost every other bicycle most of the time. This is a shared use path that we're talking about, and I think sharing with strangers is hard. We have folks exercising, walking their dogs, socializing, exercising, commuting, traveling with their kids. It's a lot that's happening in one place, and I think conflict is just going to happen. Some of these conflicts can be scary, but the risks of serious injury are still very low. And I think if you force some of us away from the shared use path, you're forcing us onto the streets, where conflicts are a lot more likely to be deadly. I think everyone who uses the path probably has some complaints about distracted, impolite, or inconsiderate path users. I think despite this, we all deserve a safe place to travel. And right now, the best place that we have is the shared use path. And I think it's pretty great. If we want to continue to fight against climate change and to achieve the vision of zero roadway deaths, I think we need to make sure that we aren't removing safe travel options for bikers. We need to find more ways to encourage all of these transportation methods, and I'd argue that that even includes electric scooters and skateboards. And that doesn't come from limiting the uses of the shared use path without providing a similarly safe route for those users. And I'm probably not the only one who uses a vehicle like this as a supportive mobility device. We just hit 10,000 miles on our e-bike this summer, and many of those miles have been on the shared use paths, and I hope that continues. And we're also thinking about getting another e-bike. I support the current rules and etiquette guidelines for the shared use paths, and I encourage you to keep them. Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse. Does anybody have a question for the registrant? Okay, who else do we have in?
So next we have Alexandre Minot of Canterbury Road opposes and wishes to speak.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to the committee for taking the time to hear me out. I just want to make sure that we have our priorities straight. I think what the numbers from Vision Zero show is that in Madison, pedestrians get killed by cars, not by bikes. And in terms of speeding, I think we see a lot of speeding from drivers. I think the commission does have that straight. We just spent an hour and a half discussing speeding on High Point Road. So I really understand the situation here. People are startled when a bike zooms really close to them. And the right-of-way of pedestrian is almost absolute, right? So I'm not sure we need to add additional rules here. If people are zooming past pedestrians, they are already violating a rule in the sense that any side step from the pedestrian, like the pedestrian has a right to make that side step. So cyclists need to reduce their speed around pedestrians and need to allow for plenty of space when they overtake. And we already have a legal framework for that. So I don't think that we need to add speed restrictions. The other thing is, I'm currently working with my elder and Director Tao to try to get speed enforcement on McKenna, where we see cars drive upwards of 50 miles an hour where the speed limit is 30. And the Madison Police Department doesn't really have the resources to spare to do enforcement like that. So I really don't expect them to do speed enforcement on bike path or on shared use path, sorry. So I think we're just going to add a rule without adding any enforcement. And so I don't think the rule itself would change anything. I think it can actually create legal problems. If a bike was to hit a pedestrian currently, they would almost certainly be responsible for that, and their insurance would kick in. Now, if the insurance decides that actually the bike was traveling above the speed limit, then maybe that biker isn't insured anymore. So I think we're just creating legal problems without solving any solutions. Let me go through my notes to see if I had anything down. Yeah, I mean, Madam Calloway mentioned that e-bikes had been banned in somewhere because there was a crash. If vehicles were banned every time there was a crash, I think cars would have been banned a really long time ago. So I just want to make sure that e-bikes are treated with the same standard as we would any other vehicle. So that was what I wanted to say with regards to item number 5. I would also like to oppose item number 6. I don't think we should ban e-bikes from sidewalks. My 2 main points are the following. First of all, a lot of people bikes on sidewalks because they are not safe on streets. And before we remove a category of users from the sidewalk, we need to make the streets safer. And until that happens, we cannot remove bikers from sidewalks. Bikers don't want to use sidewalks, and a lot of them don't. The ones who do it for a very specific reason. And that includes children who are learning how to bike, and they might learn how to bike on an e-bike, and that might be the only bike they have. And so we can't just tell them they have to be on the street. The second point I have is that Madison is using widened sidewalks instead of multi-use path more and more. The latest example is Mineral Point alongside the BRP. And so we just can't remove e-bikes from those widened sidewalks because they're essentially multi-use path. They just don't have that status for various reasons. But they are a good infrastructure, and so e-bikes should still be allowed here. With regards to the speaker that spoke alongside Madam Calloway, I think her name was Madam Haynes. She was talking about people biking on the sidewalk in State Street. Again, that is something that's already not allowed. So I think we already have the legal framework that we need. If there needs to be more enforcement, then maybe we need more enforcement. But I think really we need maybe better education and potentially a little bit of signage if need be. All right. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for your comments. So Aiden, you can note that he spoke on item 6 as well. Anybody have any questions for the registrant? Okay, see no hands. Who else do we have?
So next we have Josh Olson of East Washington Avenue, opposes and wishes to speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So I guess I get a really easy job here because the 2 previous speakers have covered basically everything I want to cover. I'm opposed to this. I bought an e-bike in, I guess, last year. I've been able to put on about 2,000 miles, which I wasn't expecting. And similar to the first speaker, Jesse, I use it to get to work, so I didn't have to sweat and try and take a shower or manage all of that. So it made it very convenient for me. When I was looking to purchase an e-bike, I was kind of struggling. Do I go class 1 or class 3? I'm trying to commute. Maybe the speed will be helpful. And then I realized after going with the class 1 that going faster than 20 miles per hour on a bike is just scary. So I personally don't even go much faster than that. And I know that's not going to describe everyone because I also drive the speed limit, and there are people that drive 30 miles per hour above the speed limit. But people are going to do what they're going to do. In terms of enforcement, I think that's going to be really difficult to actually do well. So I don't think there's any value in using resources to try and enforce speed limits on bikes when we just as easily struggle to enforce those speed limits on cars. I'll just copy what the other speaker said. Cars are doing way more damage than bikes are doing. whether it's in Madison or in the United States. In the United States, we have 44,000 deaths that come from car crashes every year. So that is something that I think we are wasting valuable time and resources looking at trying to do something that, at least from the data that I've seen, doesn't contribute significantly to severe injury or deaths in a way that cars do. So when it comes to these shared use paths, it sounds like pedestrians, bikers, people that are using other means of mini mobile transit, they're looking for more than what they currently have. And I would suggest that we just continue to expand our network, make it possible for bikers to have more space where they can feel safe and they don't have to be next to cars. I've never had as a walker on those shared use paths when I was in college and as a biker now, I have never had a scary moment. I have had several scary moments in the last 2 years that I've been more seriously biking, including 2 weeks ago where I almost got doored by a car that didn't see me. They parked, they opened their door. That probably would have put me out of commission for a couple weeks because it's not something that I was anticipating and I barely skated out of the way. So in general, I think we are trying to restrain something that could be scary to people, but in general, most people are polite and there are a lot more better uses for the limited amount of resources that we have in terms of making people safe from cars. So, I will say, speed study, totally open to it. I think that's the best thing that we could do from here. Getting up-to-date data since 2019 would be very useful. So fully supportive of that. And if you can convince me that this is more dangerous than I think it is, I'm willing to change my mind. But for now, it's not. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Any questions for the registrant? Okay, seeing no hands. Who else do we have, Aiden?
Next is Mark Shahan of Pier Drive, neither supports nor opposes, and wishes to speak.
Go ahead, Mark.
Hello?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay, it was slow to let me in. My name is Mark Shahan, and I've been bike commuting since I came here in 1982. I share a number of the feelings that previous speakers have said, but I have a little bit different take. That said, I much appreciate how e-bikes have increased users on the paths, and my wife is actually considering getting an e-bike so she can keep up with me. But over the past several years, I've had a number of encounters with e-bikes on the Southwest path that are of the bad type. I've had one person who refused to wait to pass a pedestrian as I was approaching the pedestrian from the opposite direction, causing me to swerve to avoid a crash. And this person never slowed down and was traveling at a high speed. Another time, I was approaching a group of pedestrians from the opposite direction that included kids. An e-biker passed me and then weaved between me and the peds, missing me by less than a foot. And I was barely able to miss the pedestrians. This person was going approximately 30 miles per hour because I accelerated to 25 miles per hour to catch up to them, but I was left in the dust. This kind of brings me to the major concern I have is that a lot of e-bikers don't have the bike handling skills to handle 20 plus miles per hour on a busy multi-use path. And believe me, they're out there. My experience is people get an e-bike and want to see how fast they can go. An elderly neighbor got an e-bike and he got going down a hill too fast and came to an intersection, lost control of his bike and had a hard crash, and he doesn't bike anymore. Another big concern I have is that experiences like that, especially for families that have kids out there either learning to bike or walking the path, if they have experiences like the two I described, that makes them less likely to want to use the path. And I think that's the wrong signal to be sending. And maybe others that have spoken have not seen that sort of thing, but I have seen it, unfortunately, a little too often. I don't know quite what the answer is. Anything you do, as others have said, the issue is how do you enforce it? So say if you decided to ban type 3 e-bikes on multi-use paths, how do you enforce that? I think it might be easier doing that than trying to enforce a speed limit, because I don't think, as I said, you're going to get a police out there to do anything. But if you make it clear to bike shops, don't sell those bikes in Madison, I think that is more doable. I also registered on item 6, and I'll just say another incident I saw. I was driving on Whitney Way going the speed limit at 30 miles an hour, and somebody on a motorized scooter, e-scooter, was going on the sidewalk along Research Park, and he was keeping exactly paced with us. So he's going 30 miles an hour down the sidewalk. And I shuddered to think if they encountered somebody with a child or something like that. Again, I'm not quite sure what the enforcement mechanism is, whether it's more public service announcements or some spot enforcement, but that would be even scary to me to meet somebody like that on a 5-foot wide sidewalk. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Comments or questions for Mark? Okay, not seeing any. Thank you so much. Who else do we have?
The next is Blake Wason of Laurel Crest, poses and wishes to speak.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
All right, hi. Yes, my name is Blake. So I want to give you a little background about me. So I have been using these multi-use paths basically since I've moved to Madison. I have a few thousand miles between walking, running, and biking on both a acoustic and an e-bike. I oppose the adding of the speed limit because it, while it adds a feeling of security to some people, knowing that there's a limit, as others have said, it doesn't actually affect anything. There's no enforcement to it. And I think beyond that, it signals, especially by singling out e-bikes with this, of them kind of being under attack. I think what we heard a lot is that there are people who are using e-bikes as a replacement for cars. If we are trying to limit the use of, or considering high speeds on these paths, is going to do more to push people away from switching over to biking and push more people onto roads, either biking on the roads that have inadequate infrastructure, putting them more at risk of fatality and injury, or else putting them into cars. Personally, I've had a few close calls on the multi-use paths. Almost all of them have been with cars, either crossing at intersections or on driveways. The issues that people have brought up with close passes and people weaving in and out don't actually seem to be an issue with speed, but more of how people are behaving on these paths and interacting with other users. Weaving in between kids and other users is just as dangerous at any speed, going 15 miles an hour versus 20. And that behavior is not something that I don't think anyone would agree is good behavior, and we should minimize that. But saying that it should be a lower speed, I don't think is really addressing the issue. Madison is trying to put more people out of cars and onto more sustainable sources of commuting. And if we continue on this path, and we're going to obviously have more conflict points on these shared use paths between different use cases of pedestrians, cyclists, of varying speeds. And as more and more people get funneled into these small areas, I think the real solution is just that we have to expand and provide more infrastructure that people are wanting. We can't just limit what is working and push users out to try to limit demand for this space because it's being so utilized. And then ideally, we should be able to split off widen these multi-use paths like we have in other areas, allowing for areas for pedestrians and for bicyclists to help reduce these conflicts. I think that's going to be a much more productive option for increasing safety as well as allowing for more usage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Blake. Comments or questions for Blake? Okay, seeing no hands. Who else do we have, Aiden?
So next we have Wendy Lovinger of Canterbury Road opposes and wishes to speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello, my name is Wendy Lovinger. I live on Canterbury Road. I recently moved to the west side of Madison. When I lived on the east side of Madison, I biked all the time, and I found it to be quite safe. I'm speaking in opposition to 6. Now I bike sometimes around here, and there are lots of places on the road where there's no bike path, and people, as has been discussed, people speed a lot, and I don't feel safe biking on the road. So I would prefer if there wasn't removed the option to bike on the sidewalk before putting infrastructure in for all of the roads. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. Comments or questions for Wendy? Okay, seeing no hands. Who else do we have? Aiden?
Our last registrant, but they do not wish to speak, was Nicholas Davies of Richard Street, registered in opposition for both items.
Okay, and I think he did send an email, didn't he?
Correct. Yeah, he did send in public comment.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks to everybody for coming in and sharing your thoughts. So comments or questions for Renee and Colleen, both on item 5. We've talked a lot about e-bike speeds and speed policy on shared use paths in the past, and restricting e-bikes and like devices on sidewalks. I think, Renee, that's a little bit different twist that we haven't really focused on before. Would that be right?
That is correct. That's kind of a new thing that came up more recently.
Yeah. So comments or questions? Robbie?
I actually have a question for Eric. And I tried to look at the documents, but I couldn't really find the answer that I was looking for. Are there any state restrictions on us restricting the type of bike that is used on, say, multi-use paths or sidewalks or streets or anything else? I guess not streets, but I know that when Segway looked like they were going to be the next big thing, the state preempted, I think they preempted us banning them by classifying them as personal mobility devices. So I'm just wondering, of the 3 types of e-bikes, is there any restriction on something that we as a city could do?
So there are, I don't know the status of Segways off the top of my head. I will say that. And then as far as the city's ability to regulate, I think that handout sort of indicates some of where we can prohibit various types of vehicles. And I think the city, and this is probably an oversimplification, so if there's a specific question, I could, would be happy to follow up with you via email in regard to answering, any specific case. But generally speaking, I think the city has some ability to prohibit individual types of vehicles from various public ways. We don't have we don't have carte blanche to just do that. Short of reading out, a lot of what's in that handout, I don't know that there's a quick yes or no answer. I think probably the thing I could say is commission members could email with any proposed course of action, and I would be able to let that commission member know pretty quickly whether that would be a possible regulation or whether it would run afoul of the Wisconsin statutes.
Okay. Thanks. I just, somewhere in the back of my mind, I used to serve many, many moons ago on the State Trails Commission. And many moons ago, I thought that there was that the DNR at least had restricted class 3 bikes, or maybe it was class 2. You had to be pedaling and they couldn't have a power over X, and that's where the different types of bikes are classified. Certain types of bikes from state trails. But then somewhere again in my foggy memory, I thought that the legislature restricted that ability to differentiate between the types of e-bikes. So that's the basis of my question. So, but I guess you don't know the answer at the moment, and maybe I have misunderstood or have forgotten what the circumstances were that I'm remembering. So
I would also...
Go ahead.
I would just also offer that one thing complicating it is that if an e-bike user does not turn on their motor, then their e-bike is generally treated like a bicycle. And so the practicality for enforcement, I think as one of the commenters mentioned, the police resources aren't there. And then the pragmatic considerations of trying to do some sort of enforcement are very difficult. That's why it may be that something like signage, may be about the best thing we can do in terms of promoting a positive bike culture. And I would certainly defer to my colleagues in traffic engineering on how to best accomplish that.
Yeah. And I just want to emphasize, I completely agree that, I can't tell what type of an e-bike something is unless people are zipping by without pedaling. And then I know that it's probably a throttle bike, probably a number 2 instead of a number 3, because you have to pedal the other ones. But I'm not suggesting that enforcement is easy, or even differentiating what type of bike something is easy. And I realize that there are many ways to hack an existing bike to make it go faster, or it's really hard to figure out what kind of an e-bike it is anyway. I just wondered, for my own curiosity, whether there were any restrictions. So
generally, if it's generating power above 28 miles an hour, it is a vehicle that is going to require a driver's license of some type. And less than that, it's going to fall into one of the 3 categories of e-bike.
Okay. Thank you.
Renee, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the statute, when they did e-bikes, does say that municipalities can definitely say that the power. Like they can't be using assist on the paths. So that was laid out, but obviously that's a hard one, right? Like, oh, you can use the path, but you can't have your e-assist on. But then that's a very complicated scenario and is basically telling some people, well, you can't really use the path, right? And then the DNR does have like sort of its own little subsection of things that it can do. Now, other things that you might do, that's definitely something that the attorney's office would need to look at more. That's just the one thing that definitely was called out when they passed the e-bike legislation.
Thanks, Renee.
Can I just clarify? So on DNR paths, they're not allowed to use assist?
No, and they have their own ability to set some slightly different rules. So they have allowed it on some, but they don't allow it on others. But they have kind of a separate little statute item separate from municipalities.
Okay. But the legislature didn't prohibit use of e-assist on paths?
No.
Overall. Okay, all right. I just wanted to clarify. Yeah.
I think there may be a prohibition on like mountain bike paths, but I don't know that well off the top of my head.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Harold, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I feel like the debate was going in directions where, anyway. So we talked about this in February. I think we came to a pretty good conclusion in February. Thank you very much, Renee, for the presentation you gave then. I've often referred to that presentation when, people talk to me to this topic as well. Like I had a scary encounter with somebody on the bike path and shouldn't we ban something or shouldn't we do something about that? And being able to point to the slides in that presentation has been, I think, really helpful because there are a lot of different considerations. So I guess we're here again, it's November, we're talking about, yes, a slightly different aspect of it related to sidewalk riding, even though that seems to be, it is already prohibited where around the square, so I'm not totally sure how that contributes to the discussion. But yeah, I guess I'm not so sure what has changed between February and November that would lead us into like, oh no, now we really have to do something. It's not that there have been suddenly a string of deaths caused by people on bike paths. We just had the World Day of Remembrance for victims, road traffic victims, where like last year, 16 people on Madison streets were killed. 2 of them were on e-bikes, but they were killed by a box truck and by somebody running a light. And so here we are talking about, well, I got spooked. It was maybe uncomfortable. There's a theoretical scenario where maybe more children in other cities ride. There was a case in Florida. But I think fundamentally, we need to be mindful that there are limited resources that we have. We just had a discussion earlier, like we can only study one option on East Wash because we have limited staff resources. Then at the same time, we're pouring resources into this topic. So I think my overall sense here and like speed studies, sure, I like data, I like speed data, I have a data collection device on my window, but is that wise use of city resources? I think one thing that probably would be a good idea, I think that's something that one of the commenters pointed out, that some people who use e-bikes do it like after they haven't been riding for a long time or maybe have never been riding. I think educational opportunities like offering adult classes like how to get comfortable with an e-bike. I know that's something in my native Germany, like some of the nonprofits offer there, like safe riding for older adults on e-bikes. Offering educational opportunities, that seems like something to look into. But between the challenges of limited staff resources, enforcement clearly not working, equity considerations, one of the commenters pointed out these mobility devices can be accessibility aids. And that's also true for the throttle devices. I know people who use a throttle e-bike because they have a hard time starting otherwise. So I guess I just don't see how things have changed from February and why we should now come to different conclusions on any of this. Thank you.
Thanks, Harold. Renee, could you just comment on why we're back here on both of these items again?
Sure. There definitely was an interest by some alders in this topic and having it reviewed. Actually, when that came up, I didn't realize at that time it hadn't even been a full year. But I think with all the flurry, with everyone talking about that editorial recently, and then there was definitely interest from alders who have received complaints about sidewalk riding.
Okay, so there was a number of requests from alders, Harold, for us to look at e-bike speeds and speed policy and shared use paths again, and to specifically look at discuss whether we should consider restricting e-bikes on sidewalks. So just so you know, that's I'm not saying we should do anything different, because we've talked about item 5 quite a bit, but just a little background there. Is that all you had then, Harold?
Yes, and thank you for the clarification. It's helpful.
Yeah, thanks. Alder Govindarajan, go ahead.
Thank you. Renee, I really hate to make you talk even more, so please be as brief as possible. But can I get an idea of, is this just a discussion? Do you want us to vote on allowing a study, or like what's the goal here?
No, I mean, I think the goal was a discussion and to see if there was a change in kind of maybe what you wanted, if you wanted more legal information about what we could do, if you wanted more data on things. I mean, I think definitely direction. And it looks like maybe Tom has an idea of what he would like to see.
Sorry. I think one thing that has occurred is, the Wisconsin State Journal put out the op-ed saying, I can't remember, but it basically was referring to this issue. This issue will grow. And so I don't think we need a motion, but I think we probably need some guidance on direction, because we heard a lot of people that spoke on behalf of preserving, e-bikes, and e-bikes are a good thing. They decrease VMT, but there is also kind of the counterbalance that there are some that perhaps might be abusing the facility. And so I suspect that, I suspect this could be an agenda item for the next 5 years. We could just schedule it, And so perhaps guidance on what the next steps would be, because I don't know if anyone's figured it out, but I know that it continues to be a source of tension in the Madison community.
Got it. Thank you. And let's say hypothetically, if we were to move forward with a study in more than just like the Capitol Trail, maybe like the Southeast Bike Path, commuter, whatever it's called, like various locations, and see how fast people are going, what would that entail? How much city resources and funding could that require? Where could that funding come from? Sorry for all the money questions, but we did just have the budget last week.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to answer, and then Renee's in her mind going to say, Tom's got it all wrong. So, but, we might be able to pull some of this data from probe data, right? And then we might also be able to put out some tubes. I think the previous data that we have from 2019 is probably from tubes, right? So we're talking, we're talking days, maybe weeks. No, we're not talking months. I think that's probably just to collect that data. Renee, do I have that assessment correctly?
Yeah, I mean, we would use tubes. Obviously, the more we do, the more, staff resources it is. Obviously, the 2019, we did one, so it wasn't too bad. And it just kind of impacts other places that we might get to in a given year to do that data collection. But it is feasible. I wouldn't want to do like a lot of them because that would be a lot of, but if we picked, like if we decided we wanted to do a few, just like maybe 3 or something, kind of different paths, different locations, but that we know are used heavily. I think the question, of course, would be, obviously people might be traveling faster if we just did the studies now, because there's not as many people necessarily out. But, or if we wanted to wait till it's a bit more crowded to see what, it's like, and do it after the weather is nicer again in the spring.
Okay, got it. I mean, personally, I would be fine with moving towards some kind of study. I am still hesitant that this is a huge topic of conversation in a way, because again, like when I bike, every day I'm biking on University Avenue, where to my right is buses going probably 25 miles an hour at least. And then on my left, definitely cars going past 30 miles an hour, and we're not really having conversations of what happens in that scenario. We're having conversations of these shared bike lanes where pedestrians are there, and there's very minimal. I mean, there's the risk of harm, but there's no lethal risk, very likely, So I do think this topic is being treated with a much more narrow lens than cars typically are, and I am cautious of that. But I wouldn't ever say no to data. I think that it's helpful. But Renee, as you mentioned, like when we do the data, it's very important as well. I'll just take campus for example. If you're doing it on a Saturday, you're not going to get a lot of speedsters, but if you're doing it during final exams, you might get a lot more, But the 2019 data we looked at, like 1.5% of folks are going above 20 miles an hour, 25 miles an hour. So I'm not sure how the enforcement mechanisms could work and whether it's useful spending city resources on signs and whatever else just to potentially go after 1.5% of folks over there, 54 people, But yeah, just my 2 cents, maybe some direction, but yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Alder. Robbie, go ahead.
Yeah, I wasn't even sure if I should say something because I feel that Harold has once again articulated what I was going to say, which is, he asked me like, why is this on the agenda again? And I said, I don't know. My guess is some alder asked for it, but I do not see any of those alders here. I don't see anybody from the council, except for the people who are on this committee, actually giving any solutions or any guidance. And as many people have pointed out, the dangers that people walking and biking and driving encounter are from drivers going much faster than 15 or 20 miles an hour. And when we solve that problem, then we can talk about e-bikes, but until we figure out how to get all the drivers to behave, I think that putting a lot of resources into figuring out how to make e-bike riders behave is really, really ridiculous, to be quite honest. And I know that when you're walking, it's not great to be passed closely. That's why people use paths, because they don't like being passed by cars when they're on their bike, when they're in the road, being passed by cars quickly. So I understand it from both perspectives, but, until somebody speaks up and gives some solutions, I'm not really sure that putting more effort into this, we can put up signs. I mean, those are a lot less expensive than enforcement, but you can see how well drivers ignore the signs that we've put up for them. So I'm not really sure how much good it is going to do if people are determined to go faster than they should. There is a certain amount of etiquette involved, and you can't force people to be polite. I think really honestly, the solution is to give more space for both pedestrians and bicyclists in the public right of way. But that would probably require taking a lane of motor vehicle traffic away. And my guess is that the same alders that are concerned about e-bike speeds would scream bloody murder if we tried to take away a lane of traffic on some major road. And I'm sure the DOT wouldn't, not the Madison DOT, but the Wisconsin DOT wouldn't be terribly happy about it either. So, and then the drivers would be down our throats. So I'm really sort of frustrated that we're putting more effort into this. But I just felt like I had to say my piece on that.
Thanks, Robbie. Alder Bennett, go ahead.
Well, look at Robbie Weber, always speaking truth to power. So, I mean, I think that, the last bit of what Robbie just said really resonated with me, that, you know, I think it's hard to find a solution to something when the solution might lie in other areas, like expanding the public right of way, of I don't know, making driving more safe, or not driving more safe, making things more, well, yeah, making driving safe for pedestrians. You know what I'm trying to say. I guess I know, at least on the council level, from what I've heard from my colleagues and from members of the public that have written in, is like a genuine concern about e-bikes. Like, I can totally see how, I don't know, any of us that's been a pedestrian on the sidewalk, to have a e-bike whiz past you is really, really scary. And I do wonder to what extent, our partnership with B-Cycle or with B-Cycle, we can, use to moderately inform the public more about bike safety. I'm genuinely just curious if there even is or would be a speed limit for e-bikes, because I would say, like, if I'm riding 15 miles an hour, that's a lot different than if I'm riding 30 miles an hour, both of which can kill a person. And I think that, to me, I don't know. It's hard because the solution doesn't happen in isolation. I don't think that any bikes should be on the sidewalk. And whenever possible, we should make it easier or we should make more bike lanes and to be more accessible for bikers to, be able to bike on the street without being on the sidewalk. But I don't know. If someone figures out the linchpin perfect solution, let me know. Maybe Tom Lynch will figure out that linchpin. So, also, I don't see how we would make. I don't see us feasibly being able to put significant resources towards enforcement, and so I think in absence of that, we really would have to focus on ridership education. And yeah, so those are the things that's running past my mind. I'm also just genuinely curious, like, what kinds of e-bikes are using? Like, are there even speed limitations to e-bikes in general? And are there ways we can dedicate areas of, shared use paths for just e-bikes or something? I don't know. That's just something running past my mind. But overall, it's a really hard thing because there's a lot of other things that need to be fixed for this thing to be fixed. I feel like it's a problem that has risen out of other more pressing problems for pedestrian safety. So anyways, I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks, Alder. Harold, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. No pressure, Tom, to figure this out all by yourself. One way to maybe turn this into a productive discussion and also to link back to the February meeting, I think if I remember correctly, Renee, back then I asked, like, how many people have been injured and killed by e-bikes, and that was, you correctly pointed out that on shared use paths, we actually wouldn't necessarily know because the police department DT 4000 reporting only applies, like it doesn't apply there. And if I remember correctly, part of the Vision Zero action plan was to look fixing that, which I think, we talk about more data would be better. And I think having better injury data on our shared use paths would be more useful than pure speed data, because okay, we can collect the speed data, then X% go over Y. We don't know if that's a class 2 e-bike or class 3 e-bike or even an e-bike at all. But I think getting better data on the injury situation, because that would then also allow us to maybe consider infrastructure changes. So did that move forward since we last talked about that at all? Or is that maybe a good way to move forward?
I mean, I think it is a good way to move forward. I have opened up a conversation with the data analyst at Public Health so that she could start thinking about how we could better understand that data. It's not something that she's looked at before, but it is something that would maybe be the most meaningful, is what is happening out there and what can we understand from the public health records.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, Harold. Bill, go ahead.
Thanks, Ann. I totally agree with Harold's thought. And I think, Renee, have you had some discussions regarding codes data, whether that's a possibility with bots doing a study?
I have talked to TOPS Lab about it. Yeah, I don't think that
bots. Bots would.
I haven't talked to bots, but I could. That's a good idea, because I know the TOPS Lab was interested in the idea, but they didn't have a solution. But I can reach out to bots as well, and I think that might help our public health.
The problem with Harold is how do you collect the data, and typically in these kind of situations, unless it's a car involved, it's not going to get on the 4,000. But I think even in many collisions that even if there's no report made, self-reporting and so forth, and those records are just not very good. But I think there's a better chance that if somebody does go to the hospital, there is a data stream there, that's a better possibility. I guess I just, in my own thoughts, I'm not as concerned about e-bikes as I am as fast bikes. Just, it doesn't matter how they get fast. If they're, it just comes down to etiquette, and I don't think a law change or ordinance change is going to. It's just etiquette is the key, and I don't know that putting up signs is going to do anything. Somebody already said it, people ignore our speed limit signs when they're driving. So why would a bicyclist, they don't necessarily know exactly how fast they're going anyway. So with their bike. So I think it's, I'm not ready to make any suggestions for any changes regarding e-bikes at this time. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. Just a point of information. We did have another alder who was in the meeting at the beginning, and they hung in there for a while, but then they had to drop off for another reason. So, Robbie, we did have somebody on early, but I'm not sure what topic they were here for. So I think Renee explained earlier why we have these back on the agenda. And, I'm in agreement that there's not much else that we should or could do with regard to e-bike speeds and speed policy and shared use paths. I mean, signage and education is something we've talked about in the past. And although the idea of better data on injuries and any kind of injuries or fatalities is attractive. And, Renee, I think that's a great idea. And if sounds like a couple people agree, if everybody agrees, maybe that's something that could help people understand that maybe it isn't as big of an issue as they think that it is. If there's some way to gather data with regard to injuries. But I do want to comment on what I view as the newer item, which is restricting e-bikes and like devices on sidewalks. And I walk a lot in my neighborhood, and I'm usually walking with a dog. And I've talked at length about how hard it is to cross Moreland Road. So vehicles are, they're not patient. They try and run us over when we're in the middle of the crosswalk. It's horrible. They don't slow down. So big issue. But I will tell you that there are some people in our neighborhood who ride e-bikes and e-scooters on the sidewalks. And when you have a very narrow walkway and a person like myself who doesn't walk fast, and my dog who doesn't, know how to obey the etiquette, and she kind of wanders around and smells and all that kind of stuff. People don't let us know they're behind us. They just go really, really fast. And it's such a narrow space. It's, for me, it's very dangerous. I'm very startled, and we've almost been hit a couple of times. I don't know how often that situation is happening, but I think that this is more of a new item, isn't it, Renee, for us to be talking about? Then certainly we've talked a lot about e-bike speeds and speed policy on shared use paths, but I think e-bikes on sidewalks is something different that we haven't really talked about. Would that be correct?
Correct. We really haven't talked about our sidewalk ordinance as it relates to biking or other uses in before. So that's definitely a kind of a new part of the discussion.
Yeah. And so I'm going to give the other side of what I just said, and that is one of the folks riding the e-scooters is a child, and one of the folks riding the e-bikes on the sidewalks is a child. And, so the counter to what I said earlier about not feeling safe is I know that the parents in my neighborhood definitely don't think it's safe for their kids to ride on the street in Moreland Road. And I would agree with them. So where else are they supposed to ride? So I don't have a solution there, but I can tell you that it's that item 6 is a different issue for me than personally than item 5. But I don't know how big of an issue it is, Renee, in the city. And I don't know how we would determine that. Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to try and make a comment. As a staff person, I'm not a policymaker because I'm not allowed to have an opinion, right? Or I think I would encourage just the group not to view this as kind of a binary thing, yes or no. It's just an emerging challenge, and I think that we have to kind of view this as an emerging challenge, and how will we deal with this as a group over the next 5 years. When the Wisconsin State Journal ran their op-ed, I got a lot of emails and I got a lot of text messages saying, when are you going to do something? So there's a lot of people that are thinking that this is an emerging challenge. I agree with what Harold says. I do know people that have been injured due to speeds on bike paths, broken collarbones and stuff, but not necessarily due to e-bikes, you know what I mean? But I think I would just encourage the group to view this as an emerging issue. And I think it's, it will continue. I suspect that e-bike usage on paths on sidewalks will just grow. So
yeah. So it may be something we need to look at every year and understand, maybe not less than a year like we did this time around, Renee, but maybe something we should consider looking at. Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on Alder Bennett's question. Generally speaking, state statute would set the speed limit on our shared use paths at 25 miles an hour. And that would also include those portions of sidewalks where bicycles and others are permitted, although in some places it may be lower, it may be 15, where there are schools or other things like that. The other thing I would note is that bicycles and just about any of these devices that we're talking about are required to yield to pedestrians already by state law. So state law is actually doing a significant amount of work for us on that. For speed restrictions, people can look at WSDAT 346.57 and it's 340.01 that defines highways and vehicles, which in this case would be pretty widely inclusive categories. Although it's notable that electric scooters are one of a few types of vehicles that are only considered vehicles when they're specifically listed as a vehicle. There's maybe a little extra care when regulating scooters in that regard. But hopefully that information answers some of Alder Bennett's question.
Okay, thanks. So I know, Renee, we've been looking at signage and education, so those are continuing efforts, correct? Okay, so I think I'm not getting any sense from anybody that we should consider any ordinance changes. So let me know if I'm wrong about that. So I think I've heard two things that we may want to consider looking at gathering additional data. One is, do we want to do another speed study, maybe on up to 3 paths? And the other, which would be really interesting if we can figure out how to do it, is gather some data on injuries on shared use paths. And so what do people feel about that? I heard I heard at least a couple of people specifically say they thought the idea of gathering data on injuries on shared use paths would be a good way to go if we could figure out how to do that. And maybe less certainty about another speed study. So what are your thoughts about that? So we can provide that guidance, and I think considering it an emerging challenge, Tom, is a great way to look at it, because people in our community are concerned about it, and our alders are concerned about it, and obviously it's getting press, and it's clear that it's a topic that needs continued conversation. So I think the question is, what additional guidance do we want to give regarding the data that we might like to see collected? And personally, I think the idea of I think both would be good, but we have limited resources. So I'd go for the injury data myself. Alder Govindarajan, your thoughts?
Thank you. Yes, injury data is very helpful. The one concern I might have with that is just specifically around my district and my area, students are not going to really report those injuries unless it's very severe. So I feel like there will be that gap in data. And I know I've spoken to Renee about this dozens of times. She won't have enough fingers to count how many times, but that's just one thing I would like to point out. And the second thing is, I think it would be helpful to kind of get an idea of how fast people are going in specific places as well. And I don't know what kind of data we can collect with that. Like, can it be broken down by time? Can we say specifically which days and dates? I think that would be helpful. But at the same time, if this is going to cost, I don't know, like more than $20,000, I'd be a little hesitant, because I don't know if that's where we want to put too much of our money into right now. But it also depends, I guess, where the funding is coming from, I suppose. But yeah.
Yeah. do you have any, can you make any estimate about what doing additional speed studies would cost, Renee?
I don't know because I don't really totally know how much staff time they take.
Yeah.
But it would be just in our operating budget. And I do think, the injury data, we'd be looking more at hospital visits. So if a student, I guess, needed to go to the hospital because of a crash, they hopefully would then be in there. So, but obviously there will be limitations of that. Like, obviously, people may or may not go, when they're going to have to, like, it's not going to capture the, like, I skinned my knee, right? And went home and, like, cleaned it up and stuff. So, but I think it's worth looking at what we can find out around injuries.
Chris, go ahead. Alder, were you done? Okay,
Yeah.
Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. As much as I love data, I don't think that there's going to be much of a solution in any data that we collect. Whether it's crashes or speed data, they're all going to be flawed. Speed data in particular, 15 miles an hour, 20 miles an hour is fine, plenty of places. 5 miles an hour is too fast on State Street when there's an event. So, it's not going to tell us that much. I think if there's anything we need to take moving forward, it's that we need to keep doing the things that we've been doing, which is creating more space for people who aren't driving, safe space, information, to building a culture of being safe, and communicating that continually as good as we can. And we just do better at, we build plenty of, we're building space for biking and walking and rolling everywhere. And that upsets people because we're taking away spaces from cars. So it will always be a challenge. And we just need to continue doing it and being better at communicating it. The State Journal called me up before they wrote that op-ed, and I mentioned to them that we had discussed this thoroughly and not much had changed, and that didn't affect what they wrote. So it's the same challenge that we will keep revisiting over and over again.
Okay, so it's going to be tough to do it. Do you feel, Renee, that you've gotten a good sense of guidance or not?
I mean, I do. It's obviously a complicated issue that will keep coming up, but I feel good that I have what I need.
Okay. All right, great. Anybody have any other comments for Renee tonight? And we'll try hard, Renee, not to come back in less than a year, right? Okay. But we know why we're here because of the editorial in the State Journal and all of the communications, plus a request, I believe, from an alder to consider restricting e-bikes from sidewalks. So we don't know the answers, but I think we're continuing the conversation, and that's what's important. So any last comments? Okay, thanks. And thanks so much for coming tonight, Renee, and hope you feel better soon. Okay, speaking of people not feeling well, item 7 is a quarterly traffic safety report, and Lieutenant Hannah is ill this evening. And she said she'd make a go of it and try and do it, but she sounded really sick. So I suggested we defer it, and she said she thought that might be best. So if we could have a motion to refer the quarterly traffic safety report to the December meeting. Harold?
So moved.
Bill?
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. I'm assuming you don't want to speak to the motion, Harold? Okay. Any objection to unanimous consent vote? Okay, great. Next we have item, and hopefully that we send best wishes to Lieutenant Hannah and hope she feels better soon. She works really, really hard for us. Item 8 is crossover reports from TC members who are members of other PCCs. Anything to report tonight? No. We've had some good long discussion, so I'm not seeing any hands. All right. Item 9 is announcements from the chair. I have heard that it's possible that the 2 vacancies on the TC might be filled soon, so yay. We've had some issues with quorum challenges, so it would be fantastic if we can have that resolved. So we'll keep watching the Common Council and keep everybody posted. So that's all I had with regard to that. With regard to future agenda topics, we're expecting at least 3 referrals from the Common Council, Metro Transit service changes, reminder about the annual statement of interest forms. I'm looking to bring the annual work plan to the meeting in December. And obviously the quarterly traffic safety report, possibly safe routes to school and other East Madison bikeways, public transportation projects. And as you can tell, that's a lot. So we may have to winnow that down and move some stuff off to January. So we'll see what sticks and what might get pushed out. Last time we added pedestrian detours during construction projects to our future agenda items. And under our PROAG discussion, we added sidewalk replacement program as something specifically we wanted to focus on, along with accessible pedestrian signals, which we'd already had on the list. So that, and then we added the Lakeshore Path study update as well. So anybody have any? So those are on the document that's saved in Legistar as far as TC member suggestions for future meetings. Anybody have anything else that they'd like to see on a future agenda item? Bill?
Just a point of information. Is the calendar for next calendar year for meetings, is that, where could I find that?
Okay, we approved it. Aiden, can you distribute that updated document to everybody so that they have it? There were, I think, a couple changes, and Tom, you filled in some stuff from some other bodies. So Aiden has that updated document, I believe. So can you just send that out to all TC members?
Yep.
Thank you.
I'll send that out.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, great. Thanks. Harold.
One potential item, speaking of media coverage, I saw there was some news coverage of no turn on red restrictions and how traffic engineering has implemented some of those, and some of them might be taken back. So I don't know if that would be a good topic to talk about. Do we need some sort of policy guidance of where do we have no turn on red? Or I know in division, yeah.
So we have one on here, Harold. I'll read what it says and you can tell me if this is good for you. Education/outreach regarding right on red compliance and safety reasons for no right on red at certain intersections. So that's what we have. Is that good? Okay.
That's good. Thank you.
Okay.
Of course, we already had it.
Well, we talked about it, but there's also been some discussion about the city potentially not allowing right on red, but that was not brought up as a topic, at least as far. So you weren't headed in that direction. Is that correct?
No, I think the other agenda item captures it well. Whether that where that leads us is a wholly different question.
Right. Okay. All right. Anybody have anything else? Okay. Great. So again, really excellent discussions tonight, and thanks so much to everybody for all your contributions, and for folks like for folks who made a significant effort to be here tonight. So we would be sure to have quorum. Thank you for that as well. So we need a motion to adjourn. Harold.
Adjournment.
And Chris.
Second.
Okay. I'm going to assume a unanimous consent vote, and thanks so much, everybody, and happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Thanks.